taking action. Administration officials have announced repeatedly that people should not come to the border now. The administration is increasing capacity to shelter unaccompanied kids humanely while testing them for COVID-19. It is restarting the Central American Minors Program to allow vulnerable children to apply to come to the United States in a safe and orderly way. Meanwhile, DHS is reluctantly continuing to use its authority to expel adults and family units from the U.S. in order to manage increased flows in the near term. In fact, the Biden administration is expelling more people than the previous one. Our borders are not open. Clearly, more will have to be done to respond to this situation while upholding our values. What we must not do is return to the morally bankrupt policies of the last administration toward children. Rest assured, this committee will continue to conduct careful oversight of the department's actions at the border. I want to hear from Secretary Mayorkas about how the department is responding. Meanwhile, we must not take our eyes off Homeland Security threats like terrorism, cyber attacks, and disaster preparedness and response. For its part, the Biden administration is working to rebuild DHS, reform our nation's Homeland Security policy, and address the situation at the border while upholding our values. However, it cannot be expected to repair in a matter of weeks everything President Trump destroyed over 4 years. I look forward today to hearing from Secretary Mayorkas about his vision for the way forward on Homeland Security. With that, I recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you very much for holding this important hearing today. And I thank you to our witness, Secretary Mayorkas, for appearing as well. We had a nice discussion yesterday, and I'm glad to see that we're getting off on the right foot, Mr. Secretary. And to everybody out there, my mother would kill me if I didn't say this. Happy St. Paddy's Day. I can't think of a more important time for both sides of the aisle to work together on threats facing the homeland. The issues we face each and every day are more complex and severe than I've ever seen. And we will only be successful by working together. And I must say, engaging in divisive rhetoric is not the answer, and never will be. In just the first few months of the 117th Congress, we have faced the ongoing pandemic, a deadly winter storm in the South, an attack on the U.S. Capitol, fallout from cyber attacks that have had significant impacts on both individuals and corporations, and a burgeoning crisis along our southern border. Not to mention threats from authoritarian nation states like China and Russia that are only getting more emboldened in their malign activities. Just over a week ago, a cyber attack on Microsoft's Exchange email server is believed to have infected tens of thousands of entities across government and industry alike. Much like the SolarWinds cyber campaign, we probably will not know the extent or the damage caused by this attack for a while. Mr. Chairman, I know that you and I are lockstep on this issue, as is the Secretary. I truly believe that cybersecurity is a preeminent threat for our national and homeland security. And if we don't act swiftly and decisively, we will come to regret it. Additionally, we are now facing a crisis on the southern border that should have and could have been avoided. Through irresponsible rhetoric and actions by this administration, we are seeing an unprecedented crisis unfold during a pandemic. The situation at the border continues to get worse every day with inadequate action or even proper acknowledgement of the severity of the situation. I just returned from the border where I started my career as a federal organized crime prosecutor in the mid-90s. And I can tell you without hesitation that it is indeed a crisis that continues to deepen each and every day. One thing that deeply disturbed me was the number of children being encountered along the border, exposed to the elements and having experienced a dangerous, traumatic journey from their home countries. As we quickly approach peak levels of unaccompanied children crossing the border, I'm very concerned that the administration's rhetoric and policies are encouraging more to attempt this dangerous journey. There's just no question about that based on my conversations with the Customs and Border Patrol agents and other experts along the border. Mr. Secretary, as I said during our phone call a few weeks ago, and again yesterday. I want to find ways to work together with you and to keep the homeland safe. It's not about who gets credit or blame. It's about doing the right thing for America. I also told you that I would be frank and transparent with you when I believe that the department and administration is not living up to its end of the bargain. Regrettably, that is where we find ourselves today. I'm deeply concerned that this administration has created a border crisis through predictably misguided policies and executive orders, denied the reality of the situation, and dodged accountability. At the same time that American schools remain closed across the country, the United States border is open to foreign nationals. After taking office, President Biden wasted no time. In fact, one of his first acts was to pull out his pen and unravel our border security and immigration enforcement posture by, among other things, halting construction of the border wall system, which the Customs and Border Patrol agent says works, implementing selective enforcement of our immigration laws, ending the Remain in Mexico policy, allowing the entry of thousands of migrants waiting in Mexico into the country, re-implementing catch and release, and canceling the asylum cooperative agreements with Central American partners. It's no wonder we have this issue we have at the border. While the president's overdue message yesterday to migrants to not make the journey to our southern border is certainly better late than never, words alone cannot undo the impact of his policies. The statistics simply do not lie about the impact of these policies. In February 2021, Customs and Border Patrol encounters the highest number of migrants recorded in the month of February in over 7 years, 100,441 people. A whopping 173% increase compared to February 2020. A 163% increase in family units from January 2021. A 61% increase in unaccompanied children from January 2021. Customs and Border Patrol officials are projecting a peak of 13,000 unaccompanied children crossing the border per month by May, which would exceed unaccompanied children encounters at the height of the 2019 crisis. And just as an aside, at the Border Patrol facility that houses unaccompanied children in El Paso, they're already over capacity, and we have more coming. Hundreds of Border Patrol agents are being diverted from interior drug checkpoints and the northern and coastal borders to respond to this surge. DHS has asked for volunteers to help manage the overwhelming number of migrants at the border. And FEMA has been taken away from, some members of FEMA have been taken away from dealing with the pandemic and vaccinating Americans to deal with the crisis. We are clearly in the midst of a humanitarian, security, and public health crisis that the administration refuses to acknowledge and is not being transparent about. This is also a crisis that has to be costing millions of dollars a day, and I expect more specificity from the department in the weeks ahead on the exact magnitude of this preventable financial burden. I know from going to the border this week that Customs and Border Patrol agents have told me that they're taking money from future payments for Customs and Border Patrol agents later this year, and that if there's not a supplemental, they won't have money at the end of the year to pay their agents. That's how bad it is. Mr. Secretary, going back to the beginning of my statement, I do not want to simply throw stones. I just don't. I would sincerely like to work with you and the administration on this issue and come to the table with solutions. Today, I would like to propose several measures the administration can take in short order to get this crisis under control. We can restart already appropriated wall funding. There is nothing more bipartisan than keeping our country safe, and the Customs and Border Patrol agents are screaming for this. And strong border security is part of that. Reimpose the Remain in Mexico policy, end catch and release, and protect Title 42 authorities. Listen to our frontline workers and continue to invest in more barriers, technology, access roads, and resources for personnel. And work with our foreign partners once again to prevent more migrants from reaching our border in the first place. And prioritize the need to test and vaccinate the frontline Customs and Border Patrol and the ICE workforce. Help me finalize legislation to follow a Homeland Security Advisory Council recommendation to create a trust fund for border surges so we can deal with them in a more timely manner. I sincerely hope that despite the rhetoric, the administration has taken this crisis seriously and that we can work together to find solutions that are good for the country. I really sincerely mean that, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for holding this hearing. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses, and with that, I yield back.
Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. Members are also reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in our February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. Without objection, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now recognize Secretary Mayorkas for his opening statement.
Thank you and good morning. Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. At the very outset, I should recognize the tragic event that took place in the surrounding areas of Atlanta yesterday. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims of that tragic event, those who lost their lives, as well as those who were injured. We are tracking that event very carefully. I have already been briefed on it, and I know that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is working underway to understand all of the facts, and that the individual who is a suspect of that event is in custody. More than 240,000 individuals dedicate their talent and energy each day to protecting our homeland security. It is an honor to appear before you to represent them and the critical work they perform in the service of the American people. DHS personnel protect our country from foreign and domestic terrorism while also protecting our privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. They secure and manage our borders while also restoring America as a place of refuge. They support a whole-of-government effort to defeat a pandemic that has impacted every part of American life while also facilitating the legitimate trade and travel needed for a strong economy. The challenges we face are great, but we do not face them alone. The Department of Homeland Security is fundamentally a department of partnerships. Congress, all of you, is one of our essential partners. I commit to working with this committee on a bipartisan basis to ensure the success of our Homeland Security mission. 43 days into my tenure as Secretary, I look forward to sharing what we have done and where we are headed. I will start with what is top of mind for every American, which is our effort to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic. On the first day of this administration, President Biden challenged FEMA to stand up 100 federally supported community vaccination centers in only 30 days. In fact, FEMA did not stand up 100 federally supported community vaccination centers in 30 days. It stood up 441. Today, that number is well over 900 and growing by the day. President Biden also challenged us to deliver 100 million vaccinations across the country in 100 days. Last week, we passed 90 million doses and are on track to reach the president's ambitious goal. Another top priority for our department is increasing the nation's cybersecurity resilience and protecting our critical infrastructure, especially in light of the recent campaigns exploiting SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange and the growing threat of ransomware. As a first step, I have directed grant funding that will provide an additional $25 million for state and local entities across the country to improve their cybersecurity, raising the total minimum amount they must devote together to this critical mission to $77 million. The department's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, remains laser focused on protecting and providing assistance to federal civilian agencies and working with the private sector to improve our defenses. Thank you very much to all of you for your leadership in recognizing the importance of this issue and for the $650 million you recently appropriated for CISA to enhance our ability to protect the nation against cyber attacks. As the United States approaches the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we face a threat landscape that has significantly evolved. While we remain vigilant about the threat of foreign terrorism, ideologically motivated domestic violent extremism now poses the most lethal and persistent terrorism-related threat to the homeland today. The January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol and on American democracy is a searing example of this threat. With our federal partners and our own offices of intelligence and analysis, civil rights and civil liberties, and privacy, we are working to assess the linkage between extremists' exploitation of social media and their acts of violence. We are expanding our intelligence and information sharing capabilities, again consistent with privacy rights, and civil liberties as part of a whole of government effort to combat domestic violent extremism. We are also equipping local communities with the tools to better address this threat. This year, and for the first time, I directed our Homeland Security grant programs to make domestic violent extremism a national priority area, requiring recipients to spend at least 7.5% of their grant awards on combating domestic violent extremism. Across the nation, this year, states and urban areas will spend at least $77 million to prevent, prepare for, protect against, and respond to acts of domestic violent extremism. There is, of course, a great deal of attention focused on the southwest border, where we are experiencing a surge of individuals attempting to cross the border. Most are single adults who are expelled within hours back to Mexico pursuant to the CDC's Public Health Authority. Families who are apprehended at the border are also immediately expelled under the same Public Health Authority unless we confront at times a limitation on Mexico's capacity to receive them. We are also encountering many unaccompanied children, children who arrive without a parent or legal guardian with them. Their families made the heart-wrenching decision to send them on a journey across Mexico to provide them with a better, safer future. The previous administration was expelling these unaccompanied children, some who are girls under the age of 12, for example, back to Mexico. We ended that practice. Unaccompanied children can make their claims for humanitarian relief in immigration proceedings, as the law provides. If it is determined that they do not have a valid claim, they will be returned in a safe manner. We have taken a series of actions to address the increase in the number of unaccompanied children at the border. We have increased our capacity to hold the children until HHS can shelter them while it identifies and vets the children's sponsors. We are increasing HHS's capacity, and I directed FEMA to support this effort. We have instituted the safe, orderly, and legal pathway for children's asylum claims to be heard, so that they do not have to take the dangerous journey to our border. That pathway, the Central American Minors Program, was torn down by the prior administration. These actions, and more that we are taking, are part of our plan to manage the arrival of individuals at our southwest border. The situation is undoubtedly difficult. We are working around the clock to manage it, and it will take time, but we will not waver in our commitment to succeed. That is our job. We will also not waver in our values and our principles as a nation. In the Department of Homeland Security, we can and we will tackle the many challenges we face while complying with our legal obligations and honoring our nation's values and principles. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your support of our department. I look forward to working with you and to taking your questions. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary for his testimony. I remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the witness. I now recognize myself for questions. Mr. Secretary, the majority of this committee was here on January 6th when the insurrection occurred. You were not Secretary, but you have had a chance to, I'm sure, review some of the reports that have been generated. Can you tell us, in your review of what occurred and what led up to the January 6th insurrection, are you reviewing that process right now?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your question. I just want to start on a personal note. I was brought to this country by my parents because of everything that the Capitol represents to the American people, and because of everything that all of you on this committee do, which is serve and represent the American people. We came because of the democracy that we learned so quickly to cherish. And what occurred on January 6th was heartbreaking, and I know some of you experienced it personally in great fear. I certainly am reviewing the events that led up to that horrible day. I'm also mindful of the fact that there are criminal investigations underway to address individuals who broke the law and perpetrated the crimes of January 6th. And so I conduct my review and I receive my briefings mindful of the sensitivities of pending criminal investigations and prosecutions. It is very much a focus of the Department of Homeland Security, of mine personally. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, domestic violent extremism is one of the gravest and most persistent threats that we as a country face, and we are fully engaged in addressing it.
Thank you very much. Since we will probably hear a lot of discussion about the border, what's the status of children who are separated from their parents on the border?
Mr. Chairman, the children who were separated from their parents under the Trump administration are the subject of an intense effort and an all-of-government effort directed by President Biden to find the parents and reunite the families and restore our nation to its core principles and values. We appointed an incredibly talented and dedicated executive director, Michelle Barnett, to lead the task force. I am the chair, along with the secretaries of State, Health and Human Services, and the Attorney General of the United States. This is a full-time effort by talented and dedicated individuals, not only in the Department of Homeland Security, but in the other departments that I mentioned. We look forward to working with this committee, with other members of Congress, and harnessing the talent and resources of the private sector and community-based organizations in this effort. We have an obligation to find the parents and to reunite those families.
Thank you very much. Earlier this month, while visiting a FEMA vaccination center in Philadelphia, you expressed the view that a person's socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, access to transportation, or immigration status should not impact their ability to receive a vaccine. I could not agree with you anymore. Can you share with the committee how you are making that a reality?
Mr. Chairman, the issue of equity is a core foundation of the all-of-government effort to address and tackle the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. FEMA uses a social vulnerability index that addresses the vulnerabilities that you identify in ensuring that the placement of the community vaccination centers address the issue of equity and equality of access to the vaccines. I will share with you that I participate, along with other cabinet members, in a weekly meeting led by Jeffrey Zients, who leads the all-of-government effort on behalf of President Biden. And the issue of equity and the emphasis on equity begins our discussions every week. It is uppermost in our minds, and that too is a core obligation of ours.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the way you've been accessible, and they've reached out to me several times. We've had several good discussions already, and I appreciate us getting off on the right foot. And I want to commend all the men and women at the Department of Homeland Security and all the subsidiary agencies for the great work they do every day. I encountered many of those this weekend in El Paso, where I started my career as a prosecutor and where I went after cartels. And I know from then, and I know now, that they're the frontline people, they're the frontline workers, and what the discussions you have with them really ring true. And after discussing things with them, I became that much more alarmed about what's going on at the border. And as we discussed yesterday in our phone call, I've got a series of questions that really require just a yes or no answer. And I would appreciate if you could just go through those quickly. If you could confirm some of these for me. First of all, do you agree that President Biden signed multiple executive actions on his first day in office to one, halt border wall construction, two, end the Remain in Mexico policy, and three, cancel asylum agreements with Central American partners?
I do, and if I may, Mr. Ranking Member, I appreciated our two conversations thus far and the spirit of partnership to which we are both committed. I share your background as a federal prosecutor, and I know we will accomplish a great deal together. May I just say one quick thing about the men and women?
Sir, if you can, but it could be very brief because I have several questions.
I will, because I share your tremendous pride in the men and women of the Border Patrol and in the men and women across the Department of Homeland Security. When I took office on February 2nd, 2% of the frontline Border Patrol personnel had been vaccinated. And what I heard, first and foremost, was the fact that their health and well-being had not been taken care of. We launched Operation VOW, Vaccinate Our Workforce, and over 26% of the frontline personnel are now vaccinated. And I know that
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I don't mean to cut you off, but I do have many questions. I do appreciate you taking care of the agents. That's very commendable. Also, do you agree that Customs and Border Patrol encountered Border Protection encountered more than 100,000 individuals in February, which was a 173% increase from February 2020? Just yes or no?
The numbers with respect to February of this year are accurate, Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you.
And 2020 is not the...
Can you confirm that Customs and Border Protection's Donna facility was recently at over 700% capacity?
I don't have the precise figure. It was certainly over capacity, Mr. Ranking Member, and we are addressing that.
Thank you. Can you confirm that Homeland Security has asked for volunteers to help manage the, quote, overwhelming, end quote, number of migrants at the border?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Mr. Ranking Member?
Sure.
Thank you.
Can you confirm that Homeland Security has asked for volunteers to help manage the, quote, overwhelming, end quote, number of migrants at the border?
We have certainly called upon the volunteer workforce to assist in managing the border, as we have done before, and we have done in many circumstances to address the varied mission of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm extraordinarily proud of our volunteers.
Can you confirm that over the weekend you directed FEMA to help receive, shelter, and transfer unaccompanied children from the southwest border?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. And FEMA was the same agency who was charged with its first nationwide disaster order in handling the pandemic and distributing vaccines?
It most certainly is, and it is extraordinarily capable in addressing the many challenges that we throughout the Department of Homeland Security and throughout the nation confront. This is not the first time that we have deployed the fantastic people of FEMA to address different challenges throughout the country.
Sir. Thank you. Can you confirm that in order to pay for the response to the surge at the border, it's highly likely that you're going to need a supplemental appropriations from Congress?
That is not certain by any means, Mr. Ranking Member, and I certainly will stay in close touch with you with respect to the financial impacts of the work that we are performing, not only in this mission set, but across the department.
Okay, now a couple quick questions. If you agree with the facts that we've set out, and I appreciate your candor, and you said earlier in your testimony that the situation at the border is undoubtedly difficult. Well, given the tremendous rise and surge of individuals coming to the border, wouldn't it be fair to call it a crisis? Because that's what your agents are calling it.
Mr. Ranking Member, first of all, if I may, I didn't necessarily agree with all the statistics that you cited. Mr. Ranking Member, I'm not spending any time on the language that we use. I am spending time on operational response to the situation at the border.
Okay, just two quick questions, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm almost done here.
That's what I'm focused on.
Despite our disagreements and despite the language characterizations, I want to talk about solving problems. And I just want to get a commitment from you of two things. One is that you're open to working with members of Congress, regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republican, to reverse a disorder at the border.
I will be a partner of members of Congress, regardless of party.
Okay, and lastly, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. Will you commit to encouraging the president to accept Leader McCarthy's well-intentioned invitation to discuss the border crisis? And I'd like to be there too, if I could, on how we could come together to fix it?
Mr. Ranking Member, I will defer to the President to how he believes he should conduct the meetings that he hosts.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes other members for questions they may wish to ask the witness. I'll recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questioning, and then mute themselves once they have finished speaking, and to leave their cameras on so they are visible. The chair now recognizes the young lady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much for your leadership. To the Secretary, it's good to see you again. We've worked together before. My time is short. My questions, I will try to be as short as possible if your answers could be likewise. I'm outraged about the shootings in Atlanta. Thank you for starting out. We offer our deepest sympathy. 6 of those individuals seem to be Asian out of 8. What is the department going to be doing about, even though the investigation is not proceeded, what may be domestic terrorism or hateful acts, violent acts against communities like Asian Americans, which have seen a surge in hateful acts? Mr. Secretary, very quickly.
Congresswoman, it's nice to see you again as well. I won't comment on the tragedy of yesterday because it is under investigation, but we are intensely focused on the greatest threat that we face in the homeland from a terrorism perspective, as I mentioned at the outset, and that is domestic violent extremism, violence that is motivated by different ideologies, including ideologies of hate against particular social groups.
I appreciate it. I hope that we will focus on Asian Americans as we have done on other groups, and certainly we know that African Americans have been the target of white supremacy and white racism. Let me move quickly to the border and indicate to you, Mr. Secretary, that this administration has a border policy. I congratulate you for it. It is not a policy of putting children in cages, which we had to suffer for year after year on the Trump administration. There are no children in cages. So I would simply ask this. I applaud the utilization of FEMA, and I applaud the utilization of a policy. Can you succinctly say what that policy is as it relates to the border and your policy for moving children who are now moving to temporary sites like Midland and Dallas to a process where they can seek asylum and or go to their custodial representative in this country? Mr. Secretary?
Congresswoman, the border is secure and the border is not open. We are expelling under the CDC's public health authority in light of the pandemic single individuals who arrive at the border. We are expelling families under that same public health authority, limited only by the capacity of Mexico to receive them. And we are not expelling children who arrive unaccompanied without a parent or legal guardian, and we are caring for their custody and their sheltering in HHS's responsibility to place them with sponsors so that they can proceed with their immigration proceedings and their claims for humanitarian relief under the laws of this country in a safe and orderly way.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And as it relates to COVID-19, our state has always been a hotspot, Texas. Let me quickly cite legislation that I have, a COVID Delivery Act of 2020 and 2021. Just want to emphasize the value of FEMA. I want to acknowledge Tony Robinson, Region 6 Administrator, and the Texas Department of Emergency Management. They've been working beautifully, but I want to emphasize that I think FEMA can stand up and do more as relates to monitoring shipments. I think they can do more by establishing an app that would help working with HHS to sort of monitor the vaccines as they're coming forward. And so I just want to be able to work with you on ideas of how FEMA can be more effective in the COVID-19 fight. Would you work with me on that?
I most certainly will, and I appreciate the recommendation and the request.
Finally, we are all aware of the horrible breach that came about through solar winds, and you mentioned it in your in your presentation. So I'd really like you to answer the question regarding the importance of having shared vulnerabilities, meaning that we have a system, and I, of course, have legislation, but I want to just focus on the concept of making sure that we know the private vulnerabilities and the public vulnerabilities, and that they're shared under the umbrella of system. Would you comment on that? We need to know the vulnerabilities so that we can begin to address the vulnerabilities. We can't have that kind of major breach.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for that question, because it returns to a statement that I made at the very outset, and that is that the department is a department of partnerships. And the public-private partnership is especially important in enhancing our nation's cybersecurity. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, within the Department of Homeland Security, is on point for enhancing that partnership. And critically important to that partnership is the sharing of information both by the private sector and the federal government. By understanding the vulnerabilities, by the attacks that individual organizations suffer, by learning from them collectively, we will enhance our nation's cybersecurity, and that is one of our critical mission sets.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for the work of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security. Look forward to working with you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes, Mr. McCall.
On a recent confirmation. You know, you and I think, have seen this movie before. In 2014, when I was chairman of this committee and you were Deputy Secretary of DHS, Obama called the surge of migrants at the southern border a humanitarian crisis, and he was right. And today, we're seeing another surge at our southern border. We've both seen this movie before, and we know the plot, and we know the outcome. As Chief of Counterterrorism and National Security for the U.S. Attorney in Texas, I learned that deterrence does work firsthand. In fact, Mr. Secretary, you were a federal prosecutor in a border state yourself. And I believe that words do matter. I know you mentioned that maybe the language doesn't matter. I think words do matter. I think you sent exactly the wrong message when you stated, quote, "We are not saying don't come. We are just saying don't come now." That is not a message of deterrence. The Trump administration, in my judgment, did a masterful job in negotiating the Remain in Mexico policy and the asylum cooperative agreements with Central America. It was actually a foreign policy achievement, and it worked. Migrants would have to wait in Mexico for their asylum trial, and the border was under control. However, with the stroke of a pen on Inauguration Day by President Biden, these policies have been suddenly reversed and canceled. Cartels and traffickers see that the green light is on at our southern border, and the United States is open for business again. Again, the message is, come on in. Just like that, catch and release has returned as a policy of this nation. And so, Mr. Secretary, has the threat. Migrants are given a date to appear in court and suddenly disappear. The children are the victims, and the cartels are celebrating this victory. Sir, with all due respect, this administration has created this crisis by rescinding these agreements. And just yesterday, you said, quote, "We are on pace to encounter more individuals on the southwest border than we have in the last 20 years. That is staggering. And I appreciate your honesty. I agree with you. It is going to be the most we've seen in 20 years. You may call that only a challenge, but I call that a crisis. So I must ask this question. Why in the world did this administration and President Biden basically shred the Trump administration's asylum agreements with Mexico and Central America? This administration's actions have had a direct cause and effect on this humanitarian and border crisis. What was this administration and the president thinking?
Congressman, it's nice to see you again, and I'm very proud of the work that we did together when I was the Deputy Secretary and you were the chairman of this very esteemed committee. Sometimes the tools of deterrence defy values and principles for which we all stand. And one of those tools of deterrence that the Trump administration employed was deplorable and absolutely unacceptable. And if we want to speak of language, then let me speak of language. I will share with you how I define a crisis. A crisis is when a nation is willing to rip a 9-year-old child out of the hands of his or her parent and separate that family to deter future migration. That, to me, is a humanitarian crisis. And what the president has committed to, and what I am committed to and execute, is to ensure that we have an immigration system that works and that migration to our country is safe, orderly, and humane. And I will share with you, if I may, Congressman.
I was against separation of families as well, but let me just say this. By rescinding these, I think, I'm now the Republican leader of the Foreign Affairs Committee, so I look at this also from a foreign policy standpoint. I think it was a blunder to rescind these agreements, which have created this exact problem and have put these children in jeopardy, and you're seeing the separation again. I think, what is happening down there, and you and I have been down there so many times, the kids, children, the babies down there, what a humanitarian crisis it is. I don't think it's a coincidence that on inaugural day, the president rescinded this foreign policy, and then all of a sudden, within February, we have hundreds of thousands of people coming in, and a projected million by the end of the year.
Congressman, let me, if I may, make 2 points. One, in fact, we have seen migration surges before. 2019 was extraordinary, 2014, and before then. And the bottom line is, and this is something about which we all agree, the immigration system is broken, and it is in need of legislative reform. And the president presented a bill, and there are bills pending before the House, and hopefully this year, and I am confident and optimistic that we will actually begin once and for all to fix a system that everyone agrees is broken.
Gentleman's time.
Mexico policy again.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island for 5 minutes, Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for convening this hearing. Mr. Secretary, happy St. Patrick's Day. Welcome before the committee, and I want to congratulate you on taking over as the Secretary of Homeland Security. I certainly look forward to working with you going forward. Secretary Mayorkas, I appreciate certainly my colleagues' concern about border security, though I have to say I wish they had raised them with the prior administration instead of focusing myopically on a wall. But I'm concerned that we're losing real sight of the real threat that we face. Physical borders aren't the only thing that we have to be concerned with. We've seen in the last several months some of the most pervasive cyber incidents in our nation's history. What's more, these incursions into our cyberspace are at the behest of our greatest adversaries, particularly China. So, Mr. Secretary, I want to start out by asking you how you view cyber threats that we face as a nation.
Congressman, I want to thank you for your focus and your leadership on this important mission set. And as I mentioned before, I want to thank the committee for its support of our department and the infusion of much needed resources to CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This is one of my foremost urgent priorities for the very reason you articulate. The cyber threats that our country faces from nation state actors as well as individual actors cannot be overstated. The threat to critical infrastructure cannot be overstated, and we've seen that in a number of exploitations in recent months and over the past several years. We have incredibly dedicated and talented individuals who are focused on it. The president has identified this as well as a critical mission set, and Ann Neuberger is an extraordinary appointment as the Deputy National Security Advisor focused on cybersecurity. This too is an all-of-government effort.
Thank you, Secretary, and I'm glad you touched on critical infrastructure. I'm a big proponent of the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agencies' work on risk analysis. In fact, I authored a provision in last year's NDAA codifying responsibilities of sector risk management agencies to support that work. Now, recent events, whether the cyber incidents tied to SolarWinds or Microsoft Exchange server or the frigid temperatures in Texas, have demonstrated how the failure of a few important assets supporting national critical infrastructure, national critical functions, can have cascading and often devastating effects. So the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, on which I serve as a commissioner, has suggested the concept of systemically important critical infrastructure, or SICI, for lack of a better term, but as a framework for managing these risks. So, Secretary, do you believe that SICI, based as it is on work the Obama administration did as part of Executive Order 13636, is a useful framework for managing risk, particularly cyber risks?
Congressman, thank you. I do, and that is very much a subject of our discussion, and I really appreciate your focus on critical infrastructure. It is a subject that I discussed with the leadership in the Department of Homeland Security on cybersecurity just a few days ago, because that is indeed a critical area upon which we all must focus. And I really appreciate your work on the commission.
Thank you, Secretary. Also, the Solarium Commission believes that DHS is really the linchpin in helping to mitigate risk before cascading failures occur. Do you agree with this assessment? And how are you engaging with your fellow cabinet secretaries and the White House to better manage risk to systemically important entities?
Thank you, Congressman. Certainly, the Department of Homeland Security and CISA in particular has a key role to play in the federal government architecture. And as I mentioned earlier in response to the Congresswoman's question, the public-private partnership is key, and we are, of course, on point for that. I had a very important meeting with Ms. Neuberger just this past Monday morning, and we spoke about everything that we are doing across the federal government in executing the president's direction, that indeed we bring all resources to bear, because each one of us has different assets, different capabilities, and different responsibilities. This is really, it's not just an all of government effort. I think, as you have correctly noted in the past, it's an all of nation effort, because here in cybersecurity, we say that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And so I share your view that we must work, all of us together in partnership to address the challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know that my time's expired, but I believe that Congress, and particularly this committee, are key partners with the department to better protect SICI. And I hope this committee, Mr. Chairman, would hold a hearing on this important topic. And Secretary, I hope that you would commit to working with us to address this systemic challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Most certainly will.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service to our country. I have to say, though, that this meeting, this hearing, for many Americans watching, has been quite nauseating thus far. The carefully read, scripted statements. I'm not sure you're here to answer questions, sir. I suspect that you're here to present a prepared narrative to the inquirers of Congress. You had stated that we're not saying don't come. We're saying don't come now. I can tell you, my sources tell me they're coming now, and they're coming through the year. You look at the cartels have 2 million in the pipeline. We're absolutely looking at a 20-year high for illegal crossings at our southern border. Well, my colleagues across the aisle, not even mentioning the cartels. America's watching this. For God's sakes, we're going to blame President Trump? You mentioned a 2019 surge. Yeah, we had a surge in 2019 because the cartels were paying attention to the election cycle in 2018 when the Democrats took the majority. we had to use every available legal power to reestablish control in 2019. We did. We had this thing down to a manageable threat. What happened? We have a 2021 surge. Why? Let me just put it out there. What happened between the control that we had and what we have now? You had the election in November of 2020, and President Biden was inaugurated on January the 20th. Americans know, they get it. The cartels are paying attention. They've loaded up their pipeline. We got 2 million illegal immigrants headed our way, and I don't believe you have a plan to deal with it. And let me say regarding FEMA, if there's not a crisis or a humanitarian disaster at the southern border, then may I please suggest we take our FEMA disaster response teams deployed there and send them somewhere where they're needed, like my district in Southwest Louisiana, where there's still hurricane victims waiting on temporary housing. Let me ask you a question that perhaps you can answer, Mr. Secretary. Do you agree that the world is currently experiencing a pandemic? And does the world include nations such as Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, Cuba, China, Iran? Is the world experiencing a pandemic?
Congressman, let me assure you of one thing before I answer your question, which is, despite our strong differences of opinion, I look forward to working with you towards shared goals.
That's very kind of you. Are we experiencing a pandemic?
Of course, the world is experiencing a pandemic. Congressman.
Okay, we're experiencing a pandemic, and we're experiencing massive surges of illegals crossing our southern border. You're the head of the Department of Homeland Security. Are we testing individuals in the facilities prior to their release into the United States? Simple question.
And I have a very direct answer. Thank you, Congressman. It is indeed our policy to test individuals before releasing them, and we have,
are we testing them before or after their process?
We have a process set up to do so. And if you'd like, I can explain that process. It has 4 parts.
No, what I'd like you to do is just tell us. I have several questions. Are we testing these illegal immigrants that are being released into our nation? Are we testing them before or after their process? You said they're being tested, that you have a plan in place.
We most certainly do. There are 4 ways in which we accomplish the testing.
Okay, you're welcome to submit that in writing. I'm reclaiming my time. To me, I think the American people are witnessing a question dodged. The bottom line is illegal immigrants are being processed at the border and released into our nation that have either not been tested or tested positive for COVID. I don't think I'm going to get a straight answer from you. I have another simple question. Do you believe that the policies initiated by President Biden since his inauguration have impacted the issues on the southern border and increased illegal crossing? Do you believe the cartels were paying attention all last year when then candidate Biden was messaging that he was going to weaken the law enforcement mission, provide some kind of a path towards amnesty or citizenship, process when the illegal crossings in a manner that was more conducive to their reception in the United States? He messaged that again and again and again. Do you think the cartels heard that? Do you think that maybe has something to do with what we're dealing with right now?
Congressman, I share a background with Ranking Member Katko and Congressman McCall.
My goodness gracious. I'm not going to get a yes or no out of you. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to submit my questions in writing, because you're not here to answer hard questions, sir. You're here to repeat narratives that's been prepared by staff and attorneys. And I don't appreciate you dodging these questions. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield my time and submit my questions officially in writing to the Secretary, and I'm going to expect them to be answered. And if they're not, we're going to make some noise. I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that when a witness is before us, he should be given the opportunity to answer the question and not shout it over. So in that vein, I will try to do that. Mr. Secretary, we've seen a lot of criminality charged insurrectionists from the attack on January 6th cite President Trump's words as their reason for participating in the attack. For example, Garrett Miller, who was charged for his role in attacking the U.S. Capitol, said that I believe that I was following the instructions of President Trump. Robert Sanford, who has been indicted for attacking Capitol Police officer, our law enforcement, the people that defend us, as was just stated by the previous member, our law enforcement, that he attacked, told the federal agents that he followed the president's instructions and gone to the Capitol for that day. Mr. Secretary, is it fair to say that that extremist groups see President Trump as their leader of their movement?
Congressman, the events of January 6th are the subject of criminal investigations and prosecutions. So I would prefer, out of respect for the integrity of that work, not to answer specifically with respect to the January 6th event. But what we also are seeing, as I've mentioned before, is a growing and persistent threat, and that is domestic violent extremism that is born of different ideologies of hate, ideologies of anti-government sentiment, ideologies of racially motivated individuals. And that is what we are very much focused on here in the Department of Homeland Security, and their words do matter.
But you can't say whether the impetus for January 6th was the insurrectioners following President Trump.
It is not, Congressman, something I will comment on right now in light of the investigations that are underway and the evidentiary impact of anything I say.
Ever since November 20th election, we've seen political leaders echo former President Trump's baseless lies that the election was stolen. Can you please share with the committee how repeating and amplifying these lies inspires and encourages the same extremists who attacked the Capitol on January 6th?
Those pronouncements, Congressman, are not fact-based. They are actually in defiance of the facts. I think Chris Krebs, who led the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency during the prior administration, who did a superb job, and I have seen the results of his great work each day, indicated that based on evidence, based on data, that the election was conducted with integrity and that the votes were not manipulated.
So basically, the loser of the election was really just playing sour grapes and trying to sway the American people to believe that there was something inherently wrong with the election. Is that correct?
Congressman, I focus on election security with our state, local, tribal, territorial partners. That is what I am focused on.
Okay, so the president's echoes were baseless. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, for 5 minutes. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the American people are deeply disturbed with the ongoing crisis along our southwest border. CBP numbers just in February show encounters of over 100,000 individuals, an increase of over 170% from the 36,687 encounters in February of 2020. This issue is of growing concern to the American public, and this is not a political issue. We are seeing calls by many members of the Democratic Party highlighting what we are seeing along the southwest border. Representative Cuellar said earlier, we are weeks, maybe even days away from a crisis on the southern border, and action is simply not an option. Our country is currently unprepared to handle a surge in immigrants in the middle of a pandemic. We see Democratic Representative Vicente Gonzalez say, I can assure you it won't be long before we have tens of thousands of people showing up on the border. And it will be catastrophic for our country, for our region, and for our district. We heard just this week, Senator Joe Manchin. Senator Manchin said, whatever message was sent, it was interpreted the wrong way. It is a crisis. Oh, it is a crisis. I know in statements that you've recently made, you talk about how we are on pace to encounter more individuals on the southwest border than we have in the last 20 years. In February, there was a letter signed by over 50 members of Congress. That letter was sent to the president. A copy of that letter was sent to you. In that letter, the letter says, we write today to bring attention to the rising immigration crisis that is already beginning at our southern border, a mere weeks into your administration. That letter goes on to say, on your first day as president, you signed multiple executive orders aimed at dismantling the security of our border, rescinding policies from the Trump administration that were working as intended to halt the flow of illegal immigration, the Biden administration directives on stopping the building of border infrastructure, revoking policies aimed at carrying out interior enforcement, halting deportations for 100 days, and suspending the Migrant Policy Protections, MPP, have all communicated that our borders are open. We know that the February numbers of 100,000 individuals over 28 days works out to an average encounter of over 3,500 a day. In 2019, at the surge of the crisis along our southwest border, former DHS Secretary Johnson, who was secretary under the Obama administration, he was questioned about this. And just 2 years ago, he said, I know that 1,000 cases a day overwhelms the system. I cannot begin to imagine what 4,000 a day looks like. So we are truly in a crisis. Mr. Secretary, we are approaching that 4,000 number that Secretary Johnson described as a crisis in the summer of 2019. In the summer of 2019, both Republicans and Democrats came together. They recognized that what we were seeing, the surge across our border, was an immigration crisis, and it was a humanitarian crisis, and it was a crisis that must be addressed. We saw President Trump put forth policies that almost immediately began to address the overcrowding that we saw across our southwest border. And I will tell you, it is time that this administration do the same thing. In less than 60 days, they have completely destroyed what was a successful policies or rolled back those successful policies by the Trump administration. Mr. Secretary, I will close my statement to you with a statement made by former Secretary of State Colin Powell. Secretary of State Colin Powell had what he referred to as the Pottery Barn Rule. The Pottery Barn Rule said, you break it, you own it. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes for 5 minutes, Mr. Correa. Unmute yourself, Mr. Correa.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. You got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. And Mr. Secretary, welcome. Let me again touch upon an issue my colleague brought up, which is the issue of COVID-19 testing at the border. Are you testing all the refugees? And for those refugees that are not turned away, for those refugees that may come into the United States for further evaluation of their case, if they test positive, do you isolate them for the requisite time to make sure that our communities are safe? I know you wanted to elaborate on those, the solutions that you have. So I want to ask you to please elaborate. Please be succinct, specific, and factual. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. So we have 4 different ways in which we test individuals who come into the country whom we do not expel. We work with community-based organizations and local officials. We release them into those community-based organizations so that they are tested and quarantined there. And we provide 100% reimbursement through FEMA to the local entities and the community-based organizations, provided the state authority does not stand in the way. We work with states when those states have the capacity to test and quarantine. We are working now with funds appropriated by Congress to fund directly community-based organizations and local facilities to conduct the testing and quarantine. And when those 3 options are not available, we have now retaining a vendor to test individuals who are in CBP custody. And if in fact they test positive, we transport them to ICE facilities for quarantine before release. That is our 4-point architecture, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it with this committee.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Secretary, let me follow up on the refugee issue on deterrence, following our federal laws, values, principles, ending children in cages, the ending of children separation. I was watching Spanish news a few days ago. I watched an interview of a young lady, no more than 14 years old, that had gone to the border. She was stating that she had gotten raped by 7 men before she got to the U.S. border. And we talk about deterrence, and I can only imagine the drivers that push immigration north, the dangers at home, the hunger. So my question to you is, when are we going to start? What are the long-term solutions to this problem? All of us agree this thing didn't happen 1 year, 2 years. It's been going on for a long time, more than a decade, 2 decades. What are the long-term solutions? When are we going to implement them? Thank you, sir.
Congressman, thank you very much. And I think that Jorge Ramos put it very powerfully on Univision, because I too listen to Spanish language television and radio, when he said that sometimes hunger is stronger than fear. There are 2 long-term solutions, both of which the president has acted upon, one of which is immediately before us, and that is to finally fix the immigration system in this country. The second is to address the root causes in the countries from which these individuals are fleeing, and specifically the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We began to invest in those countries and address the root causes, and that funding was discontinued during the Trump administration, and the president is committed to restarting that critical element of an overarching approach to our border and the issues of migration that have challenged our nation for so many years.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your appearance. Others have made reference to your March 1 statement. Quote, "We are not saying don't come, we are saying don't come now." And I'd add to that in an ABC News interview that day, you refused the suggestion to say do not come, period. President Biden has said, don't come, we're in the process of getting set up. and answering Mr. McCall, you spoke of the price of deterrence. And Mr. Secretary, are you prepared to say right now that it is wrong for people to enter the United States illegally?
Of course I am.
So it's wrong to break the law, right?
Of course it is.
And so
But
there
we
can
also,
never be
if
a
I may,
right time
Congressman,
to do
I'm
that,
sorry.
or to incite migrants to do that. Am I right, sir?
Congressman, of course it is wrong to break the law, and I dedicated 12 years of my career to prosecute lawbreakers.
Mr. Secretary,
Congressman,
I didn't ask for elaboration. Here's the question that I last asked you because you answered the question. My question is, so there can never be a right time to enter the country illegally or to incite migrants to do that. Isn't that correct?
Congressman, if I may speak of the law to which you refer, because our country has...
I didn't ask you to explain the law, sir. I just asked you whether or not it would be wrong.
Mr. Bishop, we allow the Secretary to answer your question.
He's not answering my question, Mr. Chairman. He wants to go.
I don't want you to debate him.
I'm not trying to debate him. I just want him to answer my question.
Well,
if I may,
let me put the question again, and then we'll see if I can get an answer to my question. What I asked Mr. Secretary is there cannot ever be a right time to enter the country illegally or to incite migrants to do that. Would you agree?
A claim of asylum, an individual fleeing persecution by reason of his or her membership in a particular social group. A claim of asylum is a claim that is recognized by law in the United States of America. And an individual who makes a claim of asylum is not breaking the law by doing so. And
in fact,
as a law enforcement officer, I enforce the laws of accountability as well as the humanitarian laws that Congress passed.
All right, sir. It is, in fact, entering the U.S. between ports of entry is illegal. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so there would never be a right time for someone to do that or to incite migrants to do that. Agree?
Congressman, I believe that the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act was passed unanimously by Congress. And it speaks of the right of an individual, a young person, to make a claim of asylum, and it provides for the process that we must accord that individual in making that claim. And that is a law that Congress has passed and that I am duty-bound to enforce.
Are you saying that justifies inciting migrants to enter the country between ports of entry illegally?
Of course, I'm not, Congressman.
All right.
But I just want to recognize our responsibility when a child under the age of 18, who's not accompanied by a parent or legal guardian, we encounter at the border, and what our legal responsibilities are. And those are...
After the
Yes,
signals
sir.
that the administration has sent, your statement yesterday acknowledged that the surge of migrants encountered at the border is a crisis and may soon constitute a 20-year peak, correct?
Congressman, I believe my language was, in fact, that the numbers that we are seeing could be the greatest, if in fact they materialize as they are trending, could be the largest numbers we have seen in 20 years.
Has this extraordinary surge taken you by surprise, or did you expect it?
Congressman, I'm focused on galvanizing the talent and dedication of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security to meet that challenge, and that's what we did.
I just want a yes or no to the question of whether you expected the surge that we've seen, or you are surprised by it.
I don't know that I had any particular expectation one way or the other. I just knew what we needed to do when we confront a situation, and in fact, we are doing it.
So if it took you, if you didn't have
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair
Chairman.
recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan for 5 minutes, Ms. Slotkin.
Hi, Secretary Mayorkas. Thanks for being here. I have two questions, one on immigration and one on domestic terrorism. And I will say, as someone who's still relatively new to Congress and who sat and questioned Secretary Nielsen when she came in front of us 2 years ago, I have rarely seen an issue that is more politicized and used as a political weapon than immigration. And I will say, as a former CIA officer and Pentagon official, there is no contradiction between providing significant security for our borders and treating people humanely. There is no contradiction between keying immigration to our economic needs and giving people a lawful way to come and work here so they don't have to cross the border illegally. All of these things they don't contradict each other. I just have a hard time with this idea that it is literally used as a political football. That being said, I think we need to be clear-eyed about the numbers that are coming over the border, just as we were 2 years ago when the massive surge led the Trump administration to put children in cages as a way to deter them from families from coming. We have large numbers coming over the border. We know larger numbers are coming over the border. We know that you are trying to deal with it. The men and women are working on it. But let me ask you about going forward. Comprehensive immigration reform. We all talk about it. We all use it as a talking point. The other side of the aisle had 4 years to propose something and never did. But can I ask you, do you believe that any immigration reform must address fundamental changes to our immigration system, not just sort of turn people into citizens or give them a pathway without changing the system going forward? And if so, what are the reforms to that system that you're going to push in your meetings with the White House to ensure we're not just going to be in the same situation 5 years, 10 years from now?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. I do believe in immigration reform and always have, and I think everyone agrees with the need for it. I believe that the president put forward on day one a bill that set forth a vision to achieve exactly that which you speak of, which is fundamental reform to a system that we all know is broken. I know that there are critical elements of that bill that are before the House and upon which the House will soon vote. And I think they strike at some of the core needs, the core fixes that the immigration system requires to move us forward in a better way.
Okay, I appreciate that. I would say just an honest reading of the bill, it is hard for me to understand how in a comprehensive way we actually make it easier for these folks who are risking their lives to come across the border to instead apply to legally work here. And it is hard for me to understand how some of our businesses, our farm workers, our tourism industries are going to actually have an easier time getting legal immigrants to come work here. That's what we all want. And I would just ask you to make sure that any bill that comes across, any final bill, actually shows us how the system is going to reform, not just temporarily change. On the issue of domestic terrorism, your entire department was created because of the attack on our homeland on 9/11. The department wouldn't exist without that. Can you tell me today on the issue of domestic terrorism? You noted in your testimony that lone wolf domestic terrorism was, or domestic violent extremism was your biggest worry. Are you currently more worried about domestic violent extremist lone wolves than you are about foreign terrorist lone wolves?
Congresswoman, the threat picture evolves, as you well know, given your past experience in the intelligence community. The threat picture is an evolving one. It's a very dynamic threat. When I started in the Department of Homeland Security back in 2000,
I just have very little time. I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah,
I think people deserve to understand the order of magnitude of this threat.
It is right now, forgive me, Congresswoman, right now, at this point in time, domestic violent extremism, the lone wolf, the loose affiliation of individuals following ideologies of hate and other ideologies of extremism that are willing and able to take those ideologies and execute on them in unlawful, illegal, violent ways is our greatest threat in the homeland right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, there's an old saying, it isn't rocket science. Well, some of this isn't rocket science, and it's so obvious. I mean, quite frankly, 2 months ago, we didn't have problems. We had some problems, but they were certainly greatly diminished over time. And we had agreements with Mexico, we had agreements with other countries, and we were able to make a very terrible situation much, much better and much safer. The increase in the flow of undocumented has been huge. The numbers are staggering. So for anybody to say that we're not dealing with a crisis, and by the way, it's just a matter of 2 months. I guess it's amazing how much, when you change leadership, how much change can really occur. And sometimes, quite frankly, it's not good change. Single adult and family unit apprehensions have been increasing steadily since January 20th. Under the previous administration, Customs and Border Protection saw fewer than 1,000 family units per week attempt to enter our country illegally. Now, under President Biden's leadership, it's overwhelmed. CBP is overwhelmed. They're dealing with 6,000 attempted family crossings per week. Mr. Secretary, don't tell me this isn't a crisis. It is. Folks may not want to admit it. They may not want to say that we've had a radical change in literally about 8 weeks, but we have. And we've put a different message out. And when you put a different message out, you get a different result. Currently, the Department of Homeland Security does not have a comprehensive strategy to contain the spread of COVID-19 that we're so worried about, and it's occurring through the release of migrants at the border. Additionally, many are not even being tested for COVID-19 while being released, which is mind-boggling with all the time and work we've spent on this. The situation is not acceptable. The situation is not sustainable. We are a nation of the rule of law, which demands strong borders. And the previous speaker was right. With strong borders, then you can actually attempt to straighten out, to fix this immigration problem. But when you just have people pouring in, you can't. So my question is, your department's releasing thousands of migrants from CBP custody on their own recognizance, with a notice to appear. You say there's a plan to test everyone, but senior officials from the departments told us in a briefing last week that you were not testing everyone, quarantine people who test positive. So this is mind-boggling when we've been so worried about this issue of COVID, and now what we're doing, we literally are going to create possibly another spike. We have heard from government officials along the border that people are not being tested for COVID-19 prior to their release. And people who are positive for COVID-19 are entering our public transportation systems. This is serious stuff. Besides the fact that we're not obeying the rule of law, besides the fact that people are just pouring into our borders, we're going to make people sick. I would like to know specifically how many people have been released on their own recognizance from CBP since January 20th, 21. Will you commit to sharing those numbers on a weekly basis with this committee? Yes or no?
Congressman, I will share the data with you, and I very much look forward to speaking with you when we're not so limited in time, because I disagree with so many of the statements that preceded your question.
Well,
Mr. Chairman,
I understand that, and maybe we will have that opportunity. I disagree with you disagreeing. How's that? Because all I know is I'm a simple guy. I look at 2 months ago and we had a certain situation, we were under control, and I look now with people crossing the border illegally in much larger numbers with shirts with our president's name on it. That means something under anybody's standard. Of those released, how many have been COVID-19 tested and how many have not? That's a specific number.
Interestingly, Congressman, if we look at the 2019 numbers in February, we take a look at unaccompanied children, and the numbers in 2021 are slightly greater than they were in February of 2019. If we look at individuals and family units, the numbers were far greater in number in 2019 than they are in 2021. So it's a complex issue, and those of us who have studied migration for many years understand the episodic surges that can occur. And we used to think that it was seasonal, and now our thinking is a bit different. And I very much look forward to speaking with you about it.
Well, thank you, as I do you. How many
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair
Thank you,
recognizes.
Chairman.
Yes, Chair recognizes Mr. Cleaver, who's having technical difficulties, but I think we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully, I'll come through. I apologize for whatever this issue is, but thank you very much for holding this hearing, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. If I had my choice, when I wake up in the middle of the morning, the committee that I would like to serve on because of the issues that it deals with, it would be this committee. That's due in part to our chair, but also to the men and women such as yourself who work in this issue on these issues where there's very little praise. But Mr. Secretary, congratulations on your confirmation. But I have a couple of questions. Is there intelligence to suggest that cartels have 2 million human beings or youth in the pipeline? I'm trying to. That information was given earlier by one of our members, and I'm just trying to figure out where it came from and where I can do a little bit more research on it. Can you help me on that pipeline issue, please?
Congressman, I have not seen data to suggest that number.
I haven't either, and from the time I heard it today, I started going through everything I could find, and I can't find that number. My issue, you can't solve this, and it's I don't think Chairman Thompson can solve it either. It's a national issue we have, and I don't know how it surfaced, but that number will continue to encircle the Americas as a fact, and I can't find the fact, the source of the fact, and so I'm sitting here writing a note to you, asking if you could help, and you're saying you don't know the source of that information.
I've never seen a figure like that. I don't know of its basis, and I don't know of any reason to believe that data that apparently was just expressed this morning is anywhere close to being true. I will say also, Congressman, if I may, because there have been statements made that we don't have a plan, and I haven't had an opportunity to respond to that. That's unequivocally false. Of course we have a plan. We have a short-term plan, we have a medium-term plan, and we have a long-term plan, and we're executing on all fronts. And to address the situation at the border that is upon us right now takes time. And we are working around the clock to do it. And this is what we do, and we will succeed. I believe in the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security, and I believe in our commitment, our capabilities, and we will get the challenge tackled.
Thank you, Secretary. My time is running out, but I wanted to ask you, so I guess the cartels are not sending out a press release saying, telling how many people they have in the pipeline. You don't have to answer that. But I mean, that gave me my headache for today. The other one is, do you have any idea about the youngest individual who have come into our custody from south of the border?
There are children, Congressman, who are infants to the age of 5 that come into the border. I confronted a situation of 3 young siblings under the ages of 10, the youngest one being 2 years of age, whose mother didn't make it along the dangerous journey. And that's why we communicate as we do, not to take that dangerous journey as we build legal pathways that the law provides for people to seek humanitarian relief in our nation.
Thank you. I think, has my time run out yet? if not, my question was, this word Antifa, I've been looking it up. It goes all the way back to Spain, and it was actually began to be used during the reign of Hitler, fascism in Germany. It was an opposition to fascism. Until Monday, until January, I didn't know Antifa from my Aunt Edna. That's my grandfather's sister down in Waxahachie, Texas. So at first I thought it was a relative or something, but what is Antifa? Is it an organization, or is it what is it? I mean, I hear it every day from everyone on one side.
Antifa is an abbreviation, if you will, for anti-fascist. Congressman, there are different ideologies of extremism that we are focused on to the extent that they manifest themselves in illegal conduct, to the extent that they manifest themselves in violent acts. As I mentioned before, domestic violent extremism is one of our most urgent threats to the homeland.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I've got two brief questions. When an alien crosses a line into America on his own, didn't go through any checkpoint, is he deemed an illegal?
It is an illegal crossing when an individual crosses in between the ports of entry.
Is he sent back to his country of origin?
Are you speaking of right now, if it's a single adult, the individual is expelled under the authority of Title 42 of the United States Code, which is the CDC's public health authority.
So he's illegal and he's sent back to the country that he's from.
The individual has made an illegal crossing and he is expelled into Mexico, Congressman.
Okay. Secondly, what is the number of illegals that are testing positive for COVID according to your records?
Congressman, I would be pleased to provide you with that data subsequent to the hearing. I don't have the figure before me, and I apologize.
Okay. The other thing, it's been reported you're going to be giving a briefing with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Is that true?
I believe that is this afternoon, Congressman.
Okay. Will you give the Republican Caucus or the RSC or the Freedom Caucus a meeting as well?
Absolutely, Congressman. I have committed from day one to approach my work and execute my responsibilities in a bipartisan manner.
Okay, I'm gonna yield 1 minute to Ranking Member Katko.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Secretary, I just want to have a point of clarification. We were in El Paso this weekend, and we were at the Customs and Border Protection facility there. There was 1,000 people there, was at capacity. And I was told specifically by your staff there that they did not test any of those 1,000 individuals. Excuse me, I'm sorry about the video issue. They did not test any of those 1,000 individuals at that facility. And that was a concern to me because they were all close together and the Border Patrol agents had not all been vaccinated. In fact, less than half have been vaccinated. And then they are transferred elsewhere. And so the time when they're in that facility, they are not vaccinated. I mean, they're not tested or vaccinated, and then they're sent to another place. Are you saying that maybe tested when at another place? Because they're certainly not being tested down. I want to make sure the record's clear on that.
Your question, if I may, Congressman, has two parts to it. Number one, they were not tested. If they're not tested at the Border Patrol station, as I outlined earlier, there are different capabilities upon which we are relying for the testing of individuals before they're released. We are instituting the capacity at Border Patrol stations to test, number one. Number two is that, and as I indicated earlier, the number of frontline personnel who have been vaccinated has jumped from 2% at the beginning of February when I assumed office to over 26% as of the end of February. And why? That is because of the commitment and dedication that we have made to protecting the well-being of our frontline personnel, and we have executed Operation Vaccinate Our Workforce. The
Thank you,
first
Mr.
thing I
Secretary,
heard
but I just want to
from,
make sure we're clear, sir. I just want to make sure we're clear and the record's clear. Not a single person was tested at that facility, and they were being, as we were there, they were people being transferred from that facility to elsewhere. They're there at least 72 hours. They're not being tested. The Border Patrol agents are being exposed, and then others are being exposed because they're being sent elsewhere before being tested. That's a fact. And that's just a fact. I want to make sure people understand that.
Ms. Secretary, I want to reclaim my time. I yield the balance of my time to Dan Bishop.
Gentlemen, from South Carolina.
I yield the balance of my time to Dan Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, are you aware of reports that 4 individuals on the terror watch list have been apprehended at the border recently?
I am.
What is, you made reference earlier to the price of deterrence and the prospect of people coming into the United States illegally and their rights to seek asylum. Would a terrorist have the right to enter the United States to seek asylum?
Actually, sir, no. And if I may, a known or suspected terrorist, KST, is the acronym that we use. Individuals who match that profile have tried to cross the border, the land border, have tried to travel by air into the United States, not only this year, but last year, the year prior, so on and so forth. And it is because of our multi-layered security apparatus, the architecture that we have built since the commencement of the Department of Homeland Security, that we are, in fact, able to identify and apprehend them and ensure that they do not remain in the United States. And so we actually deny them entry based on our intelligence and based on our vetting procedures, which have only grown in sophistication throughout the years. That is not a new phenomenon.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York for 5 minutes, Ms. Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today. With your confirmation, I'm eager and elated to turn the page on the cruel, inhumane, and morally bankrupt policies of the Trump administration. It's time we spend less money on border walls and more money on firewalls to protect our networks. Instead of fear-mongering about immigrants, I'm looking forward to confronting the real threats of domestic terrorism as evidenced by the attack on the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, tomorrow the House will vote on the Dream and Promise Act, a bill I proudly co-lead that will provide a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers, TPS holders, and DED recipients. I'm also proud to be co-leading the U.S. Citizenship Act, President Biden's plan to reform our immigration system, to provide certainty to those already here and address the root causes of migration. As we work to pass this legislation, can you discuss what effort DHS is already undertaking to improve the lives of those who depend on DACA, TPS, and DED after 4 years of fear, uncertainty, and instability?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. We have restarted the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, DACA, as it is commonly known. It is a program of which we are immensely proud. So many youth who actually are frontline personnel in the fight against the pandemic are DACA recipients and who will benefit tremendously from the legislation that you have proudly sponsored and for which I am grateful. We have the president has in fact used deferred enforced departure as the law provides and as presidents in the past of both parties have done. It's something we too are immensely proud of. We can be, and we are both a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I want to turn to some of the devastating humanitarian crises we're seeing in both in Haiti, Yemen, nations like Cameroon, and elsewhere around the world. For years, I've fought for TPS designations for countries such as these, and I continue to believe these protections remain essential. Under your leadership, how will DHS determine whether countries qualify for redesignation?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We in the Department of Homeland Security, through U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, study the conditions of countries that have suffered disasters, that suffer violence, military strife, and the like. We study those conditions to determine whether temporary protected status is needed in the first instance, or whether the country conditions militate in favor of the redesignation of a status previously provided. We do so in consultation with the Department of State that also studies those country conditions, and that work is underway with respect to some of the countries that you have mentioned.
Thank you again, Mr. Secretary. I currently chair the subcommittee on cybersecurity, and I appreciate the department's renewed emphasis on its cybersecurity mission. Following SolarWinds' supply chain attack, many have suggested that hackers slipped through our federal network security programs, including Einstein. But Einstein, a signature-based intrusion detection program, was never designed to detect or prevent a SolarWinds-style supply chain attack. That said, for years, experts have warned about the security limitations of Einstein, and recent breaches make clear that we must rethink our approach to federal network security, move away from legacy technologies whose security benefits have diminished, and put resources into tools that will defend against modern threats. How is the department planning to modernize its approach to the federal network security?
Congresswoman, we are very focused on that. You are correct that Einstein is a perimeter protective measure that addresses known threats, and the SolarWinds exploitation was not something that Einstein was designed for. Similarly, we have continuous diagnostics and mitigation, which is a critical tool. We are looking intently at those tools and what other tools can complement them to address unknown vulnerabilities and zero-day threats. We spoke about this earlier this week within the Department of Homeland Security with our CISA leadership and our senior counselor for cybersecurity. We are grateful to this committee. We're grateful to this committee, actually, to fund CISA with $650 million, and we now are resourced to explore and implement new technologies to supplement those we already have in place.
Well, my time has expired. I look forward to further conversation with you within this space, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Michigan, Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Mayorkas. Secretary Mayorkas, I am a former director of the Iowa Department of Public Health and a physician. During my duties as the Director of Public Health, I visited all of my county public health agencies, and several of the counties had dramatic spikes in tuberculosis because of the effects of immigration when they had not had an increase in tuberculosis or other infectious diseases in over 5 decades. I was at the border on Monday in El Paso, and yesterday I introduced my first piece of legislation, the REACT Act. This bill would require DHS to test for COVID-19 any migrant being released from CBP or ICE custody into the U.S. I've heard conflicting things today about testing. When we were there, migrants were not being tested, and they were released into the community, and often released into communities without knowledge of that community or foreknowledge. And what you said was that COVID-19 testing is required, and then isolation or quarantine once they've reached a community-based organization or an NGO or a sponsor. So very simply put, do you support or require testing for migrants before release, be it catch and release, be it released to a phone number on the shirt of a 1-year-old unaccompanied minor who has been to the border, or released into a community or to an NGO?
Congresswoman, can I take a minute because I think there's a miscommunication here with respect to when that testing occurs. It is indeed our policy to test individuals who arrive into the United States, who are encountered at the border in between the ports of entry. It is our policy to test them. We did not have the capacity to test them at Border Patrol stations. We have since begun to build that capacity so that we can do the testing there, in addition to the other three means of testing individuals that I outlined in response to Congressman's earlier question. We do support the testing of individuals, and that is indeed our policy, and we have implemented practices to execute on that policy. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. You said you support, but you don't require testing, and we know that in Brownsville, 108 migrants showed up in Brownsville and tested positive for COVID. Your department also recently announced it would be canceling an information sharing agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services. Personally, from what I experienced on the border this week, I think that's a mistake. We have unaccompanied minors as young, as you even said, some of them infants, but as young as 1 year old, showing up with no adult supervision, with a phone number at which we're HHS is to call and turn them over to a sponsor. We need to ensure that the sponsors of unaccompanied minors are not going to turn around and traffic those minors. We've seen cases of this happening. This was conveyed to us by the Border Patrol agents and by the Border Patrol Union members. We know a small fraction of the unaccompanied minors self-identify to HHS officials as gang members. For those that are teenagers and single unaccompanied males, that their age may be under 18, but there's no verification of what age they are. Information not flowing to ICE officials that lead to domestic gang forces and partner with school resources. How are you going to ensure that working with HHS that these children are not handed over to traffickers? Is parentage or familial relationship being established by DNA testing or other documents vetting by DHS documented fraud experts? And will you continue to share information with HHS?
Congresswoman, allow me to take a minute to clarify your misunderstanding of what is and is not occurring. The Department of Health and Human Services runs background checks on individuals to ensure that the individuals in whose custody a child will be released is in fact capable of and responsible for that child. Individuals with criminal backgrounds, individuals who in fact are not who they say they are, individuals with other derogatory information that establishes that they are not responsible sponsors for children. The Department of Health and Human Services does not place those children in those individuals' custody, number one. Number two, the memorandum that was on the books achieved precisely the problem of which you speak. Individuals who were responsible sponsors were reluctant to come forward because their information with respect to their presence in the United States was turned over to ICE, despite the fact that they might be lawfully present, despite the fact that they may be perfectly capable and responsible for the needs of the child, and despite the fact that they may be a close relative, even a parent or legal guardian of that child. That memorandum that existed on the books chilled the very responsible conduct that underscores your question as a physician, and it is precisely the reason why we did not continue with that memorandum. The concerns that underlie your question are our concerns as well.
Thank you. And if I have some additional time, we also found that the border wall construction that had been funded.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witness for appearing. I have had hearings taking place at the same time, and my questioning in each hearing took place at the same time. So my apologies for being a bit tardy, and I may have missed some things that have been said. But I do want to speak briefly about Texas and the fact that the announcement by the governor of the state of Texas to lift the statewide COVID restrictions came at a time when the CDC director was urging governors to keep some restrictions in place to decrease the amount of virus in circulation. And I would also add that authorities in Houston found that the UK variant of COVID in Houston is in 31 of 37 wastewater treatment plants, suggesting, in their words, ongoing and uncontrolled community spread of the more contagious strain of the virus. So, Mr. Secretary, your concerns that you might have about Governor Abbott and other governors dismantling the public health measures contrary to the advice of public health experts, please.
Let me, if I may, Congressman, say the following three things. Number one, we are encouraging individuals, organizations, government officials to follow the CDC guidelines and to encourage everyone to do the same. We are advocating strongly to ensure that everyone in the United States is vaccinated for the sake of the public health. We are following the science and the data. And third, we are hopeful that state leaders will permit us to reimburse state and local organizations and community-based organizations that perform testing and quarantine individuals who've crossed the border so that we can ensure the public health of our communities and of the individuals themselves.
Thank you. Moving to another area quickly. The president has proposed a $4 billion four-year interagency plan. I'd like to get your opinion as to just how important this plan is, because it's supposed to address underlying causes of the migration in the region.
It is very important. It is of critical importance. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we are taking short-term actions to address the situation at the border. We are taking medium-term actions, such as building lawful pathways that the laws of our country permit. And we have long-term solutions to make lasting change. And the infusion of resources in the countries of origin from which these individuals flee, the $4 billion of which the president has spoken and to which he is committed, is precisely that, to get to the root causes. Because we can talk about the pull factors, which certainly a number of us have referenced this morning, but we have to understand that the push factors are so extraordinary. Imagine loving parents willing to allow and to their young child under the age of 18 to leave home, traverse Mexico alone to reach our southern border. That speaks of the level of desperation. And we must address the root causes that lead a loving parent to do that. And that is what the $4 billion are designed to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will yield back any remaining time that I have.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Harshbarger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being here to answer these questions. Last week, your Chief Medical Officer and Assistant Secretary for Border Immigration Policy told the committee in a member briefing that CBP does not have the ability and is not testing everyone in their custody before they're released. How many have been released? Do you know that?
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, I think I committed earlier to providing that number to a fellow member of your committee, and I will certainly provide it to you as well. And as I mentioned, U.S. Customs and Border Protection did not have the capacity to test in its facilities, and now we are entering into a contract with one vendor to begin, and we will expand as needed so that we can test in a CBP facility when the other mechanisms of which I have spoken are not available.
Okay, so you do not know how many have been released and how many of those individuals were tested. Do you know that?
I'm sorry, I will get the data to you, Congresswoman. I apologize, I don't have it before me this morning.
Okay, you know, as a U.S. citizen, we have to present with a negative COVID-19 test within 3 days to re-enter the country if we've traveled internationally. And, you know, you can't tell me how many have been released or how many were tested. We absolutely need to institute and carry out a valid COVID-19 testing program in order to be able to measure these results. So that's imperative. But I will go on. I'm on the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Subcommittee, sir, and I'm really interested in the critical infrastructure designations of domestic supply chains. And that's something as a pharmacist I've been talking about for 25 years. You know, we're so reliant on adversarial nations such as China. And what do you see in the future with that? You know, we listened to a hearing about SolarWinds and how they infiltrated, and we don't even know how they infiltrated those entities. You know, we upload and apps every day, and you know, we try to keep on top of things, but it's unfathomable to me that we don't even know how that system was infiltrated. You know, like I say, as critical infrastructure goes, what are your plans to ensure that we have domestic supply chains for things like finished pharmaceuticals or chemicals, that we won't have to be reliant on adversarial nations such as China?
Congresswoman, your question is a very important one and touched on a number of different subjects. We've learned a great deal about the SolarWinds exploitation. I want to assure you of that, and I would be pleased to share information with you in that regard outside of the context of this morning's hearing. Your question touches upon a number of very significant areas of focus of ours. Number one, the supply chain and the security of the supply chain. Number two, the fact that we do have nation-state actors that employ cyber capabilities to exploit our supply chain and our critical infrastructure, and the importance of securing our critical infrastructure. And some areas of critical infrastructure are far more advanced in their cybersecurity than others, and that is one of our critical areas of focus, is to make sure that we frankly raise the bar across the national landscape. It is so vitally important, and I think your focus on it is spot on.
You know, I don't envy you in the position you're in right now, because nobody wants these immigrants coming over. They don't want them to be hungry. They want to take care. We're a giving nation. But we do, as Dan Bishop said, we are a nation of laws, and lawlessness breeds lawlessness. And without the COVID testing, over 100 people, from what I understand, have been released into these communities. Do these people know that these people have tested positive? I mean, do they know? Do the residents of those communities know? And this is such a threat that we have to quarantine for 14 days once we've been exposed to somebody. And these people have no quarantine whatsoever.
Congresswoman, let me say, we are indeed a nation of laws, and you are correct in that regard. We are also a nation of immigrants, and we can and we are both. And I appreciate your note on the humanitarian side at the very outset of your question. I must just repeat what I have said previously, which is it is our policy to test individuals. It is our policy to see that those individuals who test positive are quarantined. We have implemented different mechanisms to achieve that policy. It is our responsibility to coordinate and communicate with local communities so that they understand what is happening. We need to do that with local officials. There have been times when we have not met our responsibility as well as we should have. Those instances are brought to the attention of leadership, and they are addressed, and we improve based on the mistakes made. We are deeply committed to the mission.
I just have one.
Lady's time has expired.
Okay.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Secretary. Secretary, I appreciate the challenge you face on the border, and what I don't appreciate, though, is the feigned concern of my colleagues about these being super spreader events. I mean, these are colleagues of mine who spent the last year going to super spreader events, a number of them at the White House. They mocked the mask mandates that we have here, and I just don't believe that they have a genuine concern of the health of the people on the border presenting any super spreader threat. But I do wish you well and want to work with you to address real issues on the border, humanitarian issues. My question, though, as it relates to COVID is, do you consider COVID do you consider naturally occurring biological diseases like COVID a threat to our homeland?
I certainly do, and we have an office that is dedicated to that particular threat stream. We have quite a bit of research and development in our Office of Science and Technology addressing biological threats, Congressman. It is an area of focus, and it was when I was the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security.
And Secretary, does the office have a standing strategy to take on biological threats?
It does, Congressman, and I would be very pleased to share that strategy with you and to speak with you about it outside the context of this hearing.
Great. And Secretary, finally, what can we do when we looked at the recent attribution to Russia in its desire in 2016, 2018, and again 2020 to interfere in the election? What can we do to make sure that we learn from the mistakes of the past and our responses, and that as we go into a midterm election, that they are nowhere near as successful as they have been in the past? And I say that because I do think Chris Krebs and his team did the best job that we've seen in the last 4 years. But what can we do to still make sure that we attribute it to them, we publicly shame them, we stop the behavior, and we educate the American people about what their intent is?
Congressman, we have quite a number of tools in our toolbox to address adverse actions by state actors. And certainly we evaluate each threat to the homeland based on the facts and the dynamics that it presents. And I know the National Security Advisor of the United States has spoken on this very subject, and that we have met on it as a government across the federal government. And I don't want to speak further
Sure.
to that.
Val Demings and I are headed into an Intelligence Committee hearing. Val, I'm happy to yield to you if you want to get any questions in before you have to go.
Chair recognizes the young lady from Florida for the remaining time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swalwell and Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure how much time you have left, but Secretary, thank you so much. Let me just make one thing clear. The safety of our nation is our #1 concern. And one of the things that I will not do, though, is to use law enforcement as political pawns, like unfortunately I have seen too many times, or my colleagues on the other side of the aisle do. Since I have been on this committee, long before you and under a prior administration, I've heard about staffing shortages. I've heard about low morale, training challenges with Custom and Border Patrol officers and agents. And so I know, Mr. Secretary, you just got there, but could you please update us on the status of the men and women on the front line who, regardless of the political games I see and hear too frequently on the other side, are doing the best job that they can do?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for that question. I walked into office on February 2nd of this year with already tremendous pride in the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security and the men and women on the front lines. My pride has only swelled in the days since I took office. I will share with you that I was on the border a few weeks ago, and I saw the heroism, the true heroism of the men and women of the United States Border Patrol. I saw them undertake personal sacrifice to not only ensure that the border is secure, but that the needs of very young children are taken care of. And they accomplish both. I heard from them concerns about the fact that the leadership of the department in the past had not addressed their public health and well-being. I heard that from their representatives. And it is for that reason that we doubled down on Operation VOW, vaccinate our workforce, and we've made the tremendous strides that we have. It is why I am pushing for the right sizing of our workforce and the funding we need to accomplish that. I will do everything in my power to fully support the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security, because they do everything in their power to serve the American people and to do so nobly and ably.
Mr. Secretary,
Gentlelady's time from Florida has expired.
I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde, for 5 minutes.
Secretary, pleasure to see you here today. Do you agree that we have a crisis on the southern border? Yes or no?
Congressman, we have a very serious challenge, and I don't think the difficulty of that challenge can be overstated. We also have a plan to address it. We are executing on our plan, and we will succeed. That's what we do.
Okay.
And it's for the very reason, it's for the very reason, if I may, I apologize. It's for the very reason of which I spoke a moment ago.
Okay.
Extraordinary men and women.
Mr. Secretary, you said that to Congressman Swalwell, you said that you consider COVID to be a threat to our homeland, and a serious threat, I assume. Is that correct?
Congressman, the pandemic is a threat not only to our country, it is a threat that we are tackling like never before.
Okay.
It's a threat throughout the world.
All right,
but
thank you.
Congressman
Thank
Swalwell's question, I think, spoke to biological threats writ large, something that we in the Department of Homeland Security have historically addressed, thanks to Congress and the creation of an office that is specifically focused on it.
Do you agree that U.S. citizens must present a negative COVID-19 test taken within 3 days to enter the country after flying internationally? Do you agree with that statement? Yes or no?
I believe we require a negative test for individuals traveling internationally.
Okay, great. Yet there are thousands of foreign nationals that cross our borders and that are released into our communities without us knowing if they've had a COVID-19 test or not, whether they test positive or whether they test negative. So there appears to be a more lenient standard for foreign nationals crossing our border illegally than for American citizens. So why is that?
That is not true.
What do you mean it's not true?
It's unequivocally not true for the reasons I've expressed.
So are we testing every, excuse me, are we testing every foreign national that crosses our border to see whether they have COVID or not?
It is our policy, as I have articulated before, Congressman, it is our policy to test individuals who are apprehended in between the ports of entry, to test them and if in fact they test positive, to quarantine them. That is our policy, and we have built practices to execute on that policy.
So can you assure the American people that no one who has been apprehended is released into our communities with that still test positive for COVID-19?
Congressman, let me be clear. There were times earlier when individuals were apprehended and we sought to expel them, and we were unable to expel them, and we were compelled to release them, and we did not have the opportunity to test them. We have addressed that situation.
So right now, as we speak right now, you're telling me that no one is released into our country that is COVID-19 positive.
Congressman, allow me to repeat myself if I may.
Well, that's just a yes or no question. Just yes or no.
No, it's Congressman, if I may. The situation at the border is complex, and the complexity is evidenced by the questions I've been receiving throughout the morning. So please, if I may, it is our policy to test and to quarantine.
Okay, but are you executing to that policy 100%?
We are doing the best we can to ensure that the policy is executed 100% of the time. That I can say.
Okay, the best we can. So it is still possible then for COVID-19 or for foreign nationals who test positive for COVID-19 to enter our country. That's what you're saying, I guess?
Congressman, we do the best we can in everything that we do.
Okay, all right. Since the Biden administration took office, thousands of people have been released into the border communities. According to media reporting, since January 25th, 2021, at least 108 migrants tested positive for COVID-19 after being released into Brownsville, Texas community, where they proceeded to travel to cities throughout the United States. The mayor of Yuma, Arizona, told reporters that migrants are not being tested for COVID-19 before being released into his community, despite assertions made by the administration, and I just heard what you said. So is it the federal government's job to enforce our laws and not burden states with a public safety crisis resulting from federal policies?
Congressman, it is our responsibility to enforce federal law, and the situations of which you spoke are precisely the situations that I provided in my answer to your prior question. There were instances in which individuals were released. And you mentioned Brownsville, and that is an example of that. In Yuma, Arizona, we didn't have the relationship with community-based organizations. They did not have the same footprint, and it is precisely why we built the additional practices to which I referred earlier this morning, why we've built different practices to plug any hole to ensure that our policy, to the best of our abilities, our policy that everyone is tested and quarantined as needed, and that is what we have done. What we do is we address a challenge, and if we see an element of that challenge that we are not addressing, then we know what we must do and we do it. And that is precisely what we have done here and across the board in addressing the migration of individuals at our southwest border.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Nevada for 5 minutes, Ms. Titus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. It is so refreshing to have a professional in this field, someone of your caliber, to head up Homeland Security. Over the past 4 years, it's been a revolving door. There have been about 6 different secretaries, some of them approved, some of them not, who knew very little about what should be going on over there. We've heard a lot from our colleagues across the aisle about the immigration problem. We concede there is one, and we're working on fixing it. But I'd point out that a lot of that problem stemmed from some of the policies that Donald Trump had and from his own incompetence. There's evidence from CBP, for one example, is that the number of individuals who've been apprehended at the border has been on the rise since May 2020. So that's way back in his administration, didn't just start when Joe Biden took over. But it's not only in immigration that the incompetence of the last administration comes through. I'd like to ask you about how we're dealing with COVID and PPE. For example, Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and senior advisor, so-called senior advisor to then President Trump, told a room full of people that providing PPE and dealing with COVID was not the role of government. PPE was shortage would be solved by the free markets. Then in April of 2020, at a briefing, they stated that the strategic national stockpile was not intended for dissemination to the states. They went on to change the mission statement on the internet, because on their website, because this contradicted something else that Kushner was saying. Then he had the Project Air Bridge with some of his buddies, and who knows what happened with that. And even today, we have a survey from the past month that shows 81% of nurses are having to reuse single-use PPE. So I wonder if you could talk to us about how you're dealing with that issue, what's happening with this Project Air Bridge, how we can work together to be sure that states do get the needed equipment to fight this pandemic and that people on the front lines are protected.
Congresswoman, thank you very much. As I mentioned previously, we have really put our weight behind Operation VOW, vaccinate our workforce. Acting Deputy Secretary Pekoski and Doctors Gandhi and Eastman, our medical professionals, are very focused on the distribution of the vaccine and accessibility of the vaccine and an administration of the vaccine to our frontline personnel, including the brave men and women of the United States Border Patrol. If I can, you mentioned the increase in numbers beginning in May of 2020 at our border. If I may, Congresswoman, they began, I believe, in April of 2020. And one of the difficulties that we face with respect to the challenge of the border is the fact that our processes that pre-existed to address these challenges were dismantled in their entirety. And so we're addressing the numbers while we rebuild our capabilities nearly from scratch, while we rebuild lawful pathways that the law provides that were similarly torn down, and during the time when the infusion of resources into the countries of origin to address the root causes had been discontinued. So the challenge has been made more difficult. And then we have, of course, the pandemic and our effort to protect our men and women, to protect the American people, and the individuals whom we are encountering and placing in our custody.
Thank you very much. In fact, just a point of personal privilege, I would like to work with you on the UIC funding. This is a very important I represent Las Vegas, and it's very important to us that some of the changes Trump tried to make to that formula be readdressed so that we don't lose that needed funding to help us stay prepared for any kind of terrorist attack.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I very much look forward to working with you in that regard. I'm very familiar with the formula that underlies the UIC grants. I understand some of the concerns with respect to that formula, and I look forward to working with you to ensure that the formula is what it needs to be beginning in fiscal year 2022.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Mayorkas, it's a pleasure to see you here. Got a couple of questions. Is it unlawful for someone to enter the United States without the proper authorization?
That's great.
I'm sorry, without, forgive me, without
proper authorization, whether you're a citizen, and whether you're an alien, you've got some kind of visa to enter the United States.
an unlawful entry into the United States is certainly unlawful. Yes.
Okay, so somebody who doesn't have proper authorization entering the United States is an unlawful entry. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Congressman.
You stated on, I believe, on several occasions, people have asked you. You made a statement to migrants across the border that were looking to come into the United States. Don't come now. Have you said that?
I don't recall, but I think the message is, in fact, not to come to the border, not to take the perilous journey. The border is not open. We are expelling individuals by reason of the public health situation under the CDC's Title 42 authority. We are rebuilding, I should say, legal pathways for individuals who have claims for relief that the laws of the United States recognize and support.
So you didn't say don't come now. You're saying don't come unless you meet one of these criteria. Is that your position?
If you are speaking of individuals who are seeking to come to the southwest border, the message is do not come.
Do not come, unequivocally. Do not come.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. I had the privilege of being with some of your agents this past Monday, and they were quite candid in what they required to do their job. Number one was personnel. You said that, I'm not sure if this was you wanted to right size or you want to have appropriate number of people staffing at Customs and Border Protection. Are you going to be asking for additional personnel in your budget request to the president?
Yes, I will be.
Okay.
Yes, I have.
Thank you. The second thing that they asked, and it was pretty specific on their order, was finish the wall. And I know that the president stopped the construction of the wall, even portions of the wall that were already appropriated in a bipartisan manner. And so, are you going to be asking the president to finish the wall and the wall that has already been appropriated by Congress?
No, I will not. And if I may speak to that, Congressman.
Even though your own Customs and Border Patrol agents are saying that is definitely something that they could use, something that they want.
That is not the response of the United States Border Patrol with unanimity. And I will tell you from experience that is not the path that individuals on both sides of the aisle believe is the correct one. One of the individuals, one of the members of the United States Senate who was a hero in my home growing up was John McCain. And I remember when I was a nominee to be the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, then Senator McCain articulated what we needed to do to innovate and modernize our defenses along the border. We didn't, nor should we, rely exclusively on physical barriers because the border is not the same across its many miles of stretch, and the migration challenges are not the same along the many miles of the border on the south and, in fact, on the north as well.
Mr. Secretary,
it's a combination of things.
Secretary,
it is technology.
I only have a certain amount of time. All right, so it's funny you say that you don't have unanimity on that. I'm talking about the portions of the wall that have already been funded. Your agents, every single one of the agents I spoke to said that they would like to have those portions finished, that there are portions that were about to be rebuilt that were stopped, and it made no sense. And so I would ask you to reconsider what you're saying. I agree with you. There are places where the wall is appropriate and when there are places where the wall is not appropriate, because the final thing they said was they needed technology and they needed additional technology. There's apparently some kind of technology that they all really want, but that was third after building the portions of the wall that were basically stopped by the Biden administration. So I would ask you to reconsider that. And talk to your border agents, and they'll tell you which portions of the wall should be built and continue to be built, and where technology would actually be a better thing. And I don't disagree that technology in some areas is a much better way of handling it than a physical barrier. Finally, that's all I have. I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Catco.
You have no time to yield.
Sorry.
Chair
Okay.
recognize the Congresswoman from New Jersey, Ms. Monty Watson Coleman.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to commend Mr. Carlos Jimenez for trying at least.
Chair recognizes the young lady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take note of a couple of things. Number one is that we're talking to an individual who's been on the job about 2 months, trying to undo the inhumanity and the incompetency of a 4-year term before that. And we need to recognize that as we're beating him up. Secondly, it is really interesting for me to see that my Republican colleagues have so many concerns that children and migrants may very well be spreading the coronavirus. So let me just start by saying that I'm glad to hear that they're interested in it and that they're concerned about the pandemic. But I would note, though, that not one Republican in Congress voted for the American Rescue Plan, which provides desperately needed resources to fight this pandemic and provide relief to the American family. So it poses a question to me as whether or not we're really feigning concern and care at this point. But Mr. Mayorkas, I'd like to switch my area of question with you. I am the subcommittee chair of the TSA subcommittee, and I want to talk to you about the TSA workforce. I am concerned that the predicate upon which it was originally designed, giving the department flexibility and therefore not giving the individuals the kind of same protections on the front lines that Title V of the U.S. Civil Service Act code provides, has now resulted in individuals who've worked for this agency for some 20 years, who've never seen a decent increase in pay, who don't have the same rights and privileges and protections that other unionized employees receive. That I think is unfair, and that I think is unnecessary. And I think that we're now entering an administration that has greater respect for the value of unionization and the value of equity and equality among the workforce. So I know that some of these things, particularly putting these individuals under Title V, is something that you can do administratively, and I would hope that you would. But if not, we're also willing to engage in a legislative response to it. I, in fact, am a co-sponsor of Mr. Thompson's bill that would do just that. Well, what I'd like to ask you is, are you willing to work with us to try to accomplish this from an administrative perspective, and that we can certainly codify it later on?
Congresswoman, thank you so much. I most certainly am. I will tell you that I am very focused on this issue. I have spoken with Chairman Thompson about it. I have spoken with union leadership about it, and I've spoken with the personnel throughout the TSA establishment about it during a town hall that we had last week. It is an issue with which I am familiar by reason of my prior service, and I am studying it very carefully and with urgency, because I understand the concerns that you have, and I share them.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how much more time I have left, but at some point I'd certainly like you to tell me what you were doing to improve upon the backlog of the H-4 visas, because the backlog had the former administration's incompetence in dealing with this area as well, resulted in a backlog, resulted in women not having jobs outside of their homes. It's impacted family incomes, and it has actually robbed us of high-level skills and education that would be helpful to us in our economy.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I look forward to meeting with you and understanding better your concerns in that regard. I'm very familiar with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and its struggling financial situation. I'm aware of the financial assistance it received from Congress because of that.
I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, and I need you to know that I am an ally when it comes to ensuring that the Department of Homeland Security has the resources that it needs in order to be able to accomplish its diverse responsibilities. I also fully recognize that that agency has been starved. It's been starved of talent, and it's been starved of manpower and woman power. And I will do anything that I can to ensure that you all are treated with the respect that you need in order to keep us safe and secure in the homeland. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from Kansas, Mr. LaTurner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. I appreciate your time. I want to talk about something fundamental because that's what's on the minds of the people that I represent in Kansas. President Biden imposed a so-called deportation moratorium. He ceased unilaterally construction of the southern border wall, terminated the migrant protection protocols. His border immigration policies and rhetoric undermine, in my opinion, a core American value of American life, and it's the rule of law. This principle has guided and sustained our country for more than 2 centuries. If we reward unlawful migration with the greatest prize anywhere in the world, and I think you would agree with that, which is American citizenship, we will erode the legitimacy of our immigration system, which is the most generous system anywhere in the world. So, Secretary, what message do you think this is sending to the millions around the world who play by the rules, who respect our laws, and are waiting their turn to come to our country for the chance at a better life?
Congressman, we have had a broken immigration system ever since I can remember, and I've never heard anyone say otherwise. And yet we haven't been able to fix it legislatively. And it is my hope that we finally do. The migration challenge that we are facing at the southwest border is not new. We confronted it in 2019 and 2014 and before then. And it is a reflection of the fact that our system is broken. It is a reflection of other facts as well, of which I have spoken in my testimony earlier.
Mr. Secretary, excuse me. Do you think it's a reflection of the rhetoric of President Biden and the policies that he's implemented since coming into office? Do you think that has had an impact on the increase?
I do not.
The American people heard that answer and they are not buying it. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to the ranking member, Catco.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for the balance of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a couple of things, and I'm Mr. Mayorkas, I think you'll be happy to hear that I got a question that's not about the border. So, but I do have to make a couple observations first. I want to commend you, first of all, for acknowledging that while it is the policy or of the Homeland Security to have 100% testing at the border, you're nowhere near there. And I appreciate you for acknowledging that. And when you get 100% testing of everyone that comes across the border, I would appreciate it just letting us know, because I want to personally congratulate you when that happens. Second of all, with respect to you not recalling whether or not you said don't come now, I'm looking at a White House briefing from March 1st, and it states, quote, from you saying, quote, don't come now because we will be able to deliver a safe and orderly process to them as quickly as possible, end quote. Does that refresh recollections of whether you said before don't come now?
Congressman, the point is, the bottom line is—
No, I understand. Just wondering if you refresh your recollection.
The bottom line is that the border is not open.
I understand. Okay.
That we had—
Sir, I thank you very much. I thank you very much. And I just appreciate the answer to the question directly. And that's another quick observation, and that was that when I went to El Paso this weekend, I spoke to probably 100 different Border Patrol agents, some of whom have been assaulted, one of whom described the incident within a night or two before when they came across where there was not good fencing. And they had been assaulted by people coming across and they were injured. And there wasn't a single one of those 100 people who didn't say that we should finish the barrier because it does help keep things under control. So I'll just offer that up for your consideration and the consideration of the administration. But the question I have for you, sir, is about cybersecurity and the CISA director. As you're aware, the CISA finds itself at the forefront of not just one, but two potentially very significant cyber intrusions facing federal networks and the private sector. And as I said in my letter to President Biden last week, I'm very concerned about the delay in nominating a CISA director. Can you speak to the delay in naming the nominee? And would you agree that now more than ever, we need a permanent political leadership at CISA?
Congressman, we're very focused on filling the vacancies of leadership across the department. It's an issue that I work with the White House on every single week. And as a matter of fact, had a conversation yesterday on that very subject. I will say that yes, we do need a politically appointed Senate confirmed leadership in a number of positions throughout the Department of Homeland Security. We are very fortunate to have extraordinary talent in an acting capacity, and CISA is no different in Brandon, Wales.
Yeah, he's done a wonderful job. I admit that, but acting is not the same as permanent. And anything I can do to help move that process along, let's do that in a partnership, because CISA director is critically important. Thank you. Now you're back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the young lady from California for 5 minutes, Ms. Barragan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. Mr. Secretary Mayorkas, I want to turn to a topic of deported veterans. In this country, we have people who sign up to serve in the military. They can go fight in war. And if they get killed in war, they become a United States citizen. But if they survive and come back home, they can still be deported. I think that's completely unacceptable. And on both sides of the aisle, we should all be raising an alarm bell. On his first day in office, President Biden put forward a plan to overhaul immigration system, address the root causes of migration, and expand legal pathways for immigration. What will the Department of Homeland Security do to support our non-citizen veterans returning home after service?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your question. I raised this very issue but 2 days ago, and I think that your use of the term alarm is a fair one. This is an issue that requires urgent action, and I look forward to speaking with the Secretary of Veteran Affairs, McDonough, to see what we can do about it. We owe the individuals who have served in our armed forces so very much. Our freedom is because of them.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
I look forward to following up with you in this regard.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, as you are aware, 2021, the Department of Homeland Security began the wind down of the migrant protection protocols and began allowing individuals in the program to pursue their asylum cases while in the safety of the United States. This is a welcome first step, and I applaud the Department of Homeland Security for moving quickly to shut down this horrific program, which exposed asylum seekers to violence and dangerous conditions. However, the process announced so far only applies to individuals in MPP with an active case before the immigration courts. There are many other people who were subjected to MPP that are not covered under the plan that DHS announced, particularly asylum seekers who were formerly in MPP. DHS has called the current MPP wind down phase 1 and has stated that asylum seekers who do not have active MPP cases should await further instructions. Will there be additional phases to the MPP wind down plan?
Congresswoman, we are looking at that very question right now. As you can well imagine, we're addressing these issues that impact the southwest border in a prioritization matrix, and I look forward to conferring with you about how we are looking at it, the timing that we are thinking of. But first things first, we're going to address the challenge that we're confronting right now.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Is there any expectation on timing on when that announcement might be made?
No, I think right now we are addressing the immediate needs of the southwest border as we've been discussing throughout the hearing.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, President Biden has made a commitment to restore access to asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border, and we welcome efforts led by the president and the agency you lead to undo the MPP Remain in Mexico policy and to begin the process to be able to allow asylum seekers really the rights that they're entitled to under the U.S. law. I'd like to address some of the misrepresentations that we've heard about the situation at the border. Wouldn't you agree that it's inhumane to put children in danger?
I would.
And isn't it true that in some cases families are admitted because of a change in Mexican law, not U.S. policy?
It is our practice under the CDC's Title 42 Public Health Authority to expel families. The limitation on that is if, in fact, at particular points in time, Mexico does not have the capacity to receive the families that we seek to expel. And then we place those families in immigration proceedings. And if, in fact, they do not have a claim for relief under the law, they are to be and will be returned.
Yeah, I'm referring to a Mexican policy that has recently changed where Mexico is refusing to take some asylum seekers. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of the change in law, Congresswoman. The change in law provides that families with children of a particular age are to be in the custody of a particular organization, a government organization in Mexico rather than the immigration authorities. And that is, as I understand it, the change in Mexican law.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The Mexican law was passed during the Trump administration, and they did build capacity to prepare for its implementation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I know I'm out of time. Appreciate the time, and thank you for your efforts. Mr. Secretary, I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan for 5 minutes, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member and Secretary Mayorkas for joining us. I just want to second many of the concerns that my colleagues had around our border security and around the strong influx of both asylum seekers and migrants more generally at the border. And it's obviously a pressing challenge, and I hope we will continue to work together to address it. But I wanted to touch upon another area of focus dealing with immigration, and that has to do with the H-2B visa program. Earlier this month, bipartisan delegation of members of Congress from Michigan, including myself, sent a letter addressed to you regarding that H-2B visa program. These visas are incredibly important to the economy of Michigan and to many folks who are both in the dealing with especially seasonal tourism workers. And I think there is a strong need and a collective desire to fix this program so we can offer our businesses, especially those bouncing back from deep struggles over the past year due to COVID and the lockdown restrictions that we've had, to make sure that they're well situated in order to come back as we're on the upswing this summer. So we have many small and seasonal businesses in Michigan that rely on H-2B visa holders for employment. They struggle to find employment otherwise that is not just seasonal visas. And we are a state that has a strong domestic tourism component in the spring and summer months. So this is a vital component of our economy. And not too long ago, DHS announced that the 33,000 H-2B visa cap for the second half of the fiscal year was already reached. Now, there still remains a critical labor shortage and a need for seasonal business workers across Michigan, in addition to the rest of the country. And we're experiencing significant unemployment in this country more broadly, for which, as part of the American Rescue Plan, we had very generous federal top-up of extended unemployment insurance. But we still need these seasonal workers in order to fulfill these jobs, in order to support the hundreds and thousands of American citizens whose jobs depend on these tourism sectors, especially in parts of northern Michigan. So it's essential that we have additional visas be granted as soon as possible so we can begin to have those businesses plan to reopen for the 2021 summer tourism season. And under the law, you've been given the authority to determine if this cap of 33,000 is raised. So I guess I would like to work with your office. And again, that's why I advocate this cap be raised So I guess my first question to you, does the department currently have a plan or a proposed timeline for making a determination on this visa cap?
Congressman, thank you very much, and thank you for your letter, which I have read, and I have been studying the H-2B issue. You are correct that the annual cap has been reached. The annual cap is 33,000 in two parts, a total of 66,000. The Secretary of Homeland Security has the authority to waive that limit and issue new H-2B visas. I'm taking a very close look at that. The waiver authority has been exercised many times in the past, usually in June, as I understand it, in speaking with colleagues, and I'm looking at it with urgency because I understand your point about its seasonal nature, of course, and the summer months are looming. And if in fact that waiver authority is exercised, I understand that the speed with which it is exercised is vitally important to the market of which you speak. So I'd be very happy to speak with you outside of this hearing and confer about the issue of H-2B visas. I do
thank you, Mr.
That there's. Oh, I'm sorry, Congressman. I do think there are some reforms needed in that program, but perhaps they will not be accomplished in short order. Understanding that of the urgency with which you speak for the people of Michigan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm glad that you appreciate that. A lot of these businesses are hanging on by a thread as is, and in order to be fully staffed by the time both the season is starting and as additional vaccinations and restrictions are anticipated to be lifted, that planning requires months of work in advance, and obviously getting those visas in and getting the travel and the timeline set up is critical as well. So I'm heartened that you appreciate the urgency of the matter, and I look forward to working closely with your office on this, and I'm grateful that you're willing to work together with us to solve this problem, both addressing the short-term needs in the upcoming 2021 season and also focusing on what we can do in the long term to better reform these programs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Loria, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today. And I wanted to shift the discussion to our ports and Customs and Border Patrol. In my district, we have the Port of Virginia, and I recognize the critical role that Customs and Border Protection plays within the transportation, especially with regards to secure our nation's maritime ports and the flow, mostly in our port container traffic through there. But in the last few years, Customs and Border Patrol has increasingly relied on the ports and other non-federal entities to provide both facilities and payments of overtime for its officers in order to meet their operational needs. In my district, for example, the Port of Virginia has had to pay approximately $500,000 annually for the reimbursement to Customs and Border Patrol for overtime pay. And these are services that ostensibly, through the customs fees that are collected, should be able to support our ports without having to have an additional non-federal contribution. So I just wanted to ask you today if you would be able to provide to our district and also other ports the list of unfunded requirements, both for staffing and facilities that Customs and Border Patrol would need to be able to meet their requirements for both overtime and facilities without asking our local communities to make an additional investment in order to continue the operation of our port.
Congresswoman, I look forward to looking into that and reporting the results out to you and meeting with you on this subject. It's not one that I am intimately familiar, quite candidly, but I will share with you. I know that our fee revenue revenue at Customs and Border Protection is down, but I'm not familiar with the sharing of responsibility, if you will, for overtime. I'll look into that very quickly and circle back with you. I appreciate it.
That. And thank you so much. And we really appreciate the support that Customs and Border Protection provides to the Port of Virginia. Another issue I wanted to touch on briefly is about FEMA and disaster preparedness. We're in a coastal region that is frequently experiencing nuisance flooding, sunny day flooding, kind of ongoing flooding issues that have become increasingly more prevalent. And wanted to talk with you about ways that FEMA could assist communities that have to deal with these continuing and ongoing issues that are not one-time natural disasters such as a large storm, and how we could work together with the communities to deal with slow onset or continuing hazards, and how FEMA can be more involved in helping our communities through those issues.
So I look forward to meeting with you about that as well, because that is something that we are looking at, especially given climate change and its impacts on the Homeland Security and our mission sets, and how we can best equip local communities to address the impacts of climate change, severe weather conditions being one of them. So I very much look forward to working with you in that regard, and we'll schedule a meeting to that end. And I thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And lastly, I'm new to this committee, but have been serving previously also on Armed Services, and I'm very glad to be serving on the Transportation and Maritime Security Subcommittee of this committee, and interested in the Coast Guard and the continued possibility of expanding the Coast Guard operations in the Western Pacific in support of enforcing, unrecognized Chinese maritime claims and illegal fishery activities, and all of those different things that are of utmost concern. So would love to also have a conversation with you about how we can further leverage the Coast Guard and these national security issues that impact our homeland.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that as well. I meet regularly with the Commandant, Admiral Schultz, and our acting Deputy Secretary, David Pekoski, hails from an illustrious career in the United States Coast Guard, and I'm very familiar with the issues and very much look forward to speaking with you about them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Cmte, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate everyone's time here today. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. I know we've been in and out of meetings all day today, so if this question has been asked previously, I apologize. Can you tell me what FEMA stands for?
The Federal Emergency Management Administration.
Excellent. So since FEMA has been now deployed to the border, that would stand to reason that there is an emergency on the border, correct?
Congresswoman, perhaps you did not hear me when
yes or no will suffice.
We have a very serious challenge at the border, and we are tackling it.
So FEMA, being the Emergency Management Administration, they deal with emergencies, and they are now being deployed to the border, and it's not an emergency? Is that what I'm hearing?
Congresswoman, if you'll allow me, FEMA, the men and women of FEMA, have tremendous capabilities, operational capabilities to address challenges that we confront in a series of our mission sets.
And I'm glad you said, I'm so sorry, I have to reclaim my time because I'm very limited. And I'm glad you said that, because the men and women of FEMA are incredible. And I represent a hurricane prone state. So this is really important to me, especially as the ranking member of the Emergency Preparedness and Response and Recovery Subcommittee. So with everything that we have going on, a global pandemic, a border crisis, with everything happening, does FEMA have the resources necessary to effectively respond to the pandemic, the border crisis, and the upcoming hurricane season, in your opinion?
Yes.
And again, just, yes, they do?
Yes. Yes, and let me share with you a glowing example of that. As I said at the outset, the President set an ambitious goal for FEMA to set up 100 federally supported community vaccination centers in 30 days. They stood up 441 in 30 days, and the number is over 900 today. Their capabilities are extraordinary, and I have tremendous confidence in their ability to provide the assistance that they are to Health and Human Services in addressing
and that critical infrastructure, right?
Children, in handling the issue of the unaccompanied children arriving in large numbers at our southwest border, and their other mission sets. Tremendous confidence.
Excellent. So real quick, talking about the infrastructure, and I know FEMA is great when it comes to standing up infrastructure, but talking about DHS as a whole, and I know you all play a role here, do you support the walls around the capital region?
What wall, are you speaking of the fencing, Congresswoman?
Yes, the 10-foot wall fencing with razor wire around it.
Congresswoman, that is a
Just a
issue
yes or no.
that Congresswoman, if I may, that is an issue that I have not studied. I've left to the security experts with respect to what particular type of physical barriers are best suited for the protection of the capital region.
And I apologize. I know I'm new here, and I know you're new here, but as Secretary of DHS of Homeland Security, you're telling me that you haven't studied whether or not a 10-foot fence around the capital region is necessary as Secretary of Homeland Security?
Congresswoman, I have deferred to the experts with respect to the nature of the physical barrier that is most effective in protecting the capital region, where that barrier should be, whether it should be singular in nature, wherever it is, or whether it should vary.
Secretary Mayorkas, I appreciate that. I'm going to reclaim my time because I think we can both agree that physical barriers do work, but I do want to bring it home a little bit because I know several of my colleagues have talked about the statistics, the numbers of folks coming over the border, but I just want to bring it home a little bit. See, I'm from a small town out west, and the month before I was supposed to graduate high school, which was 2006, one of my classmates was kidnapped by an illegal who had been deported multiple times. And I think when you have policies that incentivize folks to come over illegally and we don't have the proper mechanisms in place to protect our borders, as you say, FEMA has been deployed and they are an emergency agency, that kind of impact has resounding effects. So my question to you, her name was Amber Scott, the young lady that was kidnapped by this illegal criminal. How many more Ambers have to be kidnapped across America before you will take action?
Young lady's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
may I answer that question?
Yes.
Congresswoman, I find that question to be extraordinarily disrespectful. Disrespectful not only to me, but disrespectful to the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security and to all the frontline personnel throughout this country who dedicate themselves to the safety and security of the American people.
I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm sure the American people feel very disrespected about the border situation they're facing right now. And with
Young
that,
lady's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, for recognizing me, and Secretary Mayorkas. Welcome to the committee. Thank you for your service, and I look forward to working together to help protect our great country. With the attack on the U.S. Capitol on the 6th of January, we witnessed the merging of a wide range of domestic extremist ideologies, including members of groups with international ties like the Proud Boys, domestic extremist militia groups like the Oath Keepers and the 3 Percenters, as well as followers of QAnon, Stop the Steal, and other movements. If I can ask, as head of the Department of Homeland Security, do you agree that racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists present one of the greatest threats to our safety and security as Americans?
I certainly do, Congressman.
And thank you. And if so, how is DHS working to strengthen its understanding of these extremist groups and how they organize?
Congressman, we are gathering intelligence and information from varied sources. We are communicating that information to state, local, tribal, and territorial personnel to ensure that our first responder communities across the country are well equipped with that information. We have dedicated funding to equip state, local, tribal, territorial organizations with the ability on their own to detect and respond to those threats. We have a number of different efforts underway. We work in close partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the dissemination of products to communities through a joint information bulletin. We have many efforts underway, and I look forward to elaborating with you when we meet outside the context of this hearing.
Thank you so much.
Welcome that opportunity.
Thank you so much, and I do as well, sir. In my home state, in New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, and has been warning of the threat of militia extremist groups for several years now. In fact, it was the very first government entity in the United States to label white supremacy as a top-level terror threat. The state's Fusion Center also produces analysis and shares intelligence related to domestic terrorism threats. One thing that's come up over the years now is with DHS is how to make sure it does a better job disseminating and making use of information analysis produced by states like New Jersey and other state Homeland Security agencies to counter domestic terror threat. Is that something you have plans of doing more of? And I just want to get a sense of what your strategy is there.
Most certainly. Our ability to gather together information and intelligence and disseminate it effectively to the first responder community throughout the country is an essential element of our battle against domestic violent extremism. We have extraordinary individuals here in the Department of Homeland Security who are focused on that. You mentioned, Congressman, the Fusion Center in New Jersey, and I am familiar with it. I am very familiar with the National Fusion Center organization led by Mike Sena, and that is a critical vehicle in my mind, and we have to really resource the fusion centers so that we have an architecture across the country to use the information advisedly and effectively in countering this very serious threat that our homeland faces.
Grateful for that. What do you see, as you probably are aware, it seems that many of these domestic terror groups and movements are increasingly decentralized and don't always rely on a single leader or defined structure. What challenges do you see that are unique or particular by these threats from a decentralized extremist network? What threats that provide to the homeland and to law enforcement? And what do you think we should be doing about that?
Congressman, I think the fact that it is a decentralized threat, that it is so diffuse, that we're speaking of loose affiliations, we're speaking of lone actors. Right. We are addressing the fact that the problematic ideology that underlies their drive to violent acts is so easily disseminated throughout social media. That presents a challenge that is really quite difficult. And I met as recently as yesterday with personnel, my colleagues across the federal government, to develop strategies and best understand the threat and how we can most effectively confront it on behalf of the American people.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and look forward to working together. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman's here back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes, Mr. Pfluger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I appreciate your words saying that you'll do everything you possibly can to support the CBP agents, those in DHS that are doing their level best every single day to protect this country. I want to clarify something. You've said very emphatically that the border is secure today. You've also said that it is not open. So what you're saying is that your own CBP agents are apprehending 100% of those who are illegally crossing.
The United States Border Patrol does an exceptional job in.
Are they apprehending 100% of the illegal crossings?
I don't know of any reason to believe that they are apprehending a smaller percentage that has historically been the case.
Okay, so it's not so my definition of security. Excuse me, sir. When I look at the definition of security, it says that it's the state of being free from danger. And as a fighter pilot, I would never call something secure if there were gotaways. And your agents have told me in the last 2 months that on average, 4,500 to 6,000 gotaways are crossing the border every single day. The most concerning is the known or suspected terrorists, of which we know, and from this testimony, those have crossed over. So are you certain that we have apprehended 100% of the KSTs that have crossed the border?
Congressman, I have no reason to believe that we have not, but I must tell you, I'm completely unfamiliar with the data that you referenced. I am not certain of the accuracy of the information that you have, and I also am very troubled by the definition that you quoted. Can you repeat that definition?
Just a simple definition from the dictionary. I'd like to move on. with the data.
Because
that's
certainly
not surprising. And I would ask you, are you willing to release the Gotaway number on a weekly basis? And then likewise, when it comes to known or suspected terrorists, will you commit today to providing a classified brief, a comprehensive brief that gets into the affiliation of these terrorists and also speaks to the JTTF or their ICE concerns?
Congressman, I will honor my obligations to provide this committee with information as a primary committee of jurisdiction.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'd like to move into something that's extremely concerning. On Sunday, Midland, Texas, my home district, without notification, without coordination, without any alert to the local or state officials or to my office, received an emergency intake center with 700, up to 700 UACs between the age of 15 to 17, with no saying that they were not going to have any criminal or behavioral issues, that they would be there for 2 to 3 weeks, and that they're placed into this situation in Midland. What I'm wondering is that site going to be there for 2 to 3 weeks? Are there further sites that are going to exist? Why was there no coordination with local or state officials prior to this happening? How do we verify the age of those individuals that are there?
Congressman, it is our responsibility to communicate effectively with local communities when we have actions underway in them. If there was a failure to communicate with local officials with respect to our plans to open a facility in Midland, Texas, to shelter unaccompanied children, then that's a failure on our part, and I'll follow up and make sure that does not happen again.
We're very concerned about that failure of communication. The folks in my district and along our southern part of my own congressional district lie approximately 100 miles from the border. The reason that I started out with the questioning is because we are very worried about the security. And when you say the border is secure, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of folks that are crossing that are not contacted, that are not apprehended, I have major concerns about that. We know this because there are drones that see these individuals crossing without contact. We know this because the sign cutting along the border where there are not physical barriers or technology. Mr. Secretary, it's very concerning our policies in the last couple of months that have reversed course. And I don't have to go back into detail from this hearing today on the questioning that's already happened. Will you commit to doing everything you possibly can to secure our border?
Yes, I will. I have, as have the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security. We've been unwavering in that commitment. And your citation to the past 2 months in the context of this issue, I would respectfully submit is misplaced.
Well, I appreciate what the Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection agents do. They put their life on the line every single day. My utmost respect to them and their families, because they truly are giving everything they have to keep our country safe. More needs to be done.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Malinowski, for 5 minutes. While he's coming, we recognize the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes, Mr. Torres. Unmute yourself.
I think the congressman came, so I'll defer to him. Since he has
Hi, I'm here. Am I okay to go, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll just start with an observation. As an immigrant to this country myself, I've been listening to this debate, and I think it's important that we remember that over the last 4 years, we're talking about illegal immigration. We have seen an across-the-board effort to try to shut the door to legal immigration to the United States. Asylum virtually shut down. Refugee admissions virtually shut down for the first time in our modern history since when we turned our backs on Jewish refugees fleeing Hitler's Germany before the Second World War. We've made it harder for folks to get green cards, harder to apply for citizenship. We've banned travel and admissions from particular countries. This is a crisis. This is a moral crisis. It's something that has hurt our economy. It hurts our strength, our position in the world. And when I listen to my friends on the other side, I really think that they need to decide as we face questions about the Dreamers and about immigration reform, are they still the party of Reagan? Are they still the party of John McCain? Are they still the party that agreed in 2013 to an immigration reform compromise very similar to what President Biden has just put forward? My Republican colleagues know, they say this very often, and they're absolutely right, that we are beginning a contest as a country with the Communist Party of China. And I wish that they would recognize that one of our greatest strengths in that contest is that we are the country, the United States, not China. We are the country that attracts energy and youth and talent from around the world, that millions of people want to be American citizens. Millions of people want to be American taxpayers, want to be American soldiers. Why would we squander that advantage? I hope we don't, for the sake of promoting fear in the service of political ends. So with that comment, Mr. Secretary, just a couple of questions in that spirit. One, President Biden has pledged to raise the cap on refugee admissions after we nearly shut down refugee admissions under the Trump administration. Can you let us know why there's been a delay in actually affecting that order, signing it, and when we might expect to see it?
Congressman, thank you very much. I know that the president is considering that issue. It's a serious issue. He has committed to restoring our leadership in the world, including as a leader as a place of refuge for people's fleeing persecution. And so I will defer to him in his deliberation on that important issue. I know he's very committed to it.
Okay. Thank you. One element of this that I think is more under your control, USCIS at some point in the last administration, well, probably related to COVID, stopped doing in-person interviews for refugee applicants, but also continues, as I understand it, to refuse to do video interviews, even though it continues video interviews for people being deported, not people being admitted as refugees. And is that something that you can fix? Because there are situations where literally hours and days matter right now in terms of getting that process restarted.
Congressman, I'll have to take a look at that to see what U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services practices are with respect to video interviews of refugee applicants. I will look at that and get back to you. I'm familiar with the pros and cons of video interviews. They present tremendous advantages in a number of different respects. So I will follow up as quickly as possible.
Thank you. With very limited time, very different issue. Big controversy last year. DHS units like BORTAC involved in policing civil unrest in the United States. Would you agree that that's not necessarily an appropriate role for these essentially paramilitary units, and that any DHS units involved in policing civil unrest should not be wearing military uniforms, desert fatigues, should have identifying insignia as law enforcement does in this country?
Congressman, I'm looking very carefully at what occurred in Portland, the deployment of different resources throughout the Department of Homeland Security. And what I would like to do is give my personnel an opportunity to address the issues and questions that I have, and then I will circle back with you. I want to be respectful of my workforce, but it is an issue that I am very focused on.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino. for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming today and testifying. First question, Mr. Secretary, as you know, MS-13 is a transnational criminal organization whose members have terrorized and murdered people all over the United States and many people in my district over the past few years. It's the largest and most violent street gang on Long Island. I represent parts of Long Island. Its leadership is based in El Salvador, Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, and the gang has thousands of members across the United States, comprised primarily from immigrants from Central America. Just yesterday, multiple media outlets reported that at least 4 people on the FBI's terrorist watch list have been arrested at the southern border. What is DHS doing to secure our border and carefully screen migrants to ensure dangerous terrorists like MS-13 gang members who murdered innocent people in my district are not permitted to enter this country?
Congressman, we have a multi-layered screening protocol at the border, at all ports of entry. We screen individuals who seek to enter our country, not only by land, but also by air and by sea. And I would be very pleased, because I am so very proud, to share with you outside the context of this hearing, everything that we do to screen individuals who are seeking to enter the United States and make sure that those who pose a danger to our communities do not enter the United States. We have very rigorous screening procedures in place, and our people are very equipped to execute those procedures.
I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. And we talked about it a little bit before. You know, this year is not the only year that people from the terrorist watch list or FBI's most wanted list have tried to cross the border. I believe in 18 there were 6, 19 there were 0, 20 there were I think 3. But those are the whole year statistics. We're now it's only March 17th, and we've already had 4. Is that concerning that more people are trying to get in now, or what's with the increase in numbers?
Congressman, I am concerned if one tries to come over any length of time. That's my job, and that's the job of the people of the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, Mr. Secretary. I just, as long as we keep up, because MS-13 has been knocked back a little bit through increased enforcement in my district. I don't need them getting their foothold back in. It was not good for my district. It wasn't good for New York. It's not good for the country. So I appreciate that.
Congressman, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I prosecuted MS-13 gang members. I prosecuted many different types of gang members as in my work as an assistant United States attorney as the United States attorney across the country in the Central District of California. I would be very pleased to discuss with you the strategies that we are employing and the strategies that I have in mind to tackle this threat, which has been too persistent for too many years.
I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to switch gears real quick. I'm also the ranker on the Cybersecurity Committee. And just a quick question. Can you explain why there was no congressional notification of the White House's announcement today to establish another unified coordination group in light of the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with the communication channel, what it was and what it wasn't. Certainly, we have been amplifying the threat of cybersecurity throughout the country, and since January 20th, and we also have been amplifying the concerns around this second exploitation, the second threat to Microsoft. And so I can't speak any more than that, but I'd be very happy to follow up with you.
Okay, as long as, listen, we usually, I know Congress, the committee is usually notified when these are announced. I don't believe we received any notification. So just in the future, making sure we stay on top of that. But I have one final question. In 2015, my predecessor, Congressman Pete King, introduced the First Responder Anthrax Preparedness Act, which became Public Law 114-268. You might not have it with you now, but can you provide us with a status update as the implementation of that pilot program?
I would be very pleased to. I certainly don't have it at my disposal, but I look forward to following up with you, Congressman.
I look forward to your answers. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just for the record, we have very seldom received any notification on what the White House is doing when it's a Democrat or a Republican. And I agree with my colleague from New York. It would be nice to know, but the practice is just not something that's ordinarily done. So maybe that's something we can take up. Chair recognizes gentleman from New York again, Mr. Torres, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I have a few yes and no questions about the border crisis, which as of late has been the subject of political demagoguery. Isn't it true that there was a border crisis in 2019, not so long ago, during the Trump administration?
The numbers of individuals encountered at the border was extremely large in 2019.
That's a yes. So, isn't it true that there was a border crisis before then, in 2014, during the Obama administration?
The numbers were considerable then as well.
Yes, and now there's one in 2021. Is it fair to say, contrary to politically motivated storylines, that the border crisis is more of a cyclical occurrence than a unique consequence of Biden administration policy?
I would say it is episodic, Congressman, and we have experienced episodes of increased migration for many, many years, throughout many years.
In both Democratic and Republican administrations?
Oh, absolutely. It speaks so profoundly of the need to once and for all fix our broken immigration system.
I have a few yes and no questions about policies that might have caused or compounded the migrant surge. Isn't it true that the Trump administration cut humanitarian assistance meant to address the root causes of migration from Central America?
It did, Congressman.
Isn't it true that the Trump administration canceled the Central American Minors Program, which would have enabled children to apply for asylum from their home country without migrating to the U.S.-Mexico border?
Yes, Congressman, it did.
Isn't it true that during the Trump administration, families might have been too fearful to come forward and take custody of children in federal custody?
Congressman, if you are speaking of the memorandum
yes,
between the Health and Human Services and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, yes, the pernicious effect of that memorandum was in fact to chill relatives, sponsors from coming forward to shelter unaccompanied children, indeed.
So is it fair to say that the seeds of the present border crisis were planted long before you assumed office?
I would say, Congressman, that the challenge that we are confronting at the border is made far more difficult by reason of the factors that you have identified and some others as well.
I have a question about the 287G program. In August of 2020, then candidate Joe Biden committed to ending the 287G program, which allows state and local law enforcement to collaborate with ICE. Do you intend to fulfill that promise and end the 287G program?
I am looking very closely at the 287G program and really reestablishing a healthy relationship with state and local law enforcement throughout the country. I'm very proud of the support from the law enforcement community that I received when I was a nominee to be the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Mr. Secretary, do you intend to end it? Are you going to modify it? What's the plan?
I've got to take a close look at it. I'm very well aware of the president's commitment, but it's something that I need to turn to, Congressman.
Is there a review underway?
There is, Congressman.
So what's the timeline for that review?
As soon as possible, Congressman. And I'm sorry I can't give you a more definite answer. As this hearing has evidenced, there's a great deal of work to be done across the department, and we're doing it all.
As you know, in January, President Biden issued an executive order imposing a moratorium on almost all deportations. That executive order was subsequently put on hold by a court. In February, my understanding is that ICE issued new guidance on deportations. The new guidance on deportation, is it essentially the same as the original executive order, or are there differences?
If I may, there was an announcement from the Department of Homeland Security that removals from the country would be put on pause. Individuals would remain in detention, but that removals would be put on pause for a period of 100 days as the issues were studied. You correctly noted that a court enjoined that pause. Then on January 20th, concurrently, on January 20th, then Acting Secretary Pekoski issued a memorandum of new enforcement guidelines that are temporary until I promulgate guidelines. Guidance was subsequently issued that revised those January 20th enforcement priorities, and I am studying the issues. I intend to engage with the workforce. I intend to engage with this committee, and I intend to engage with the community as I develop guidelines to promulgate.
Gentleman's time for New York has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes, Mr. McClintock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to join you today. And Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for being here on a marathon hearing. Is it true that DHS is planning to reopen all of the MPP cases?
I'm not familiar with that, Congressman. I'll have to take a look at that and get back to you. I apologize. We're certainly processing individuals with active cases in an orderly way through discrete ports of entry. We have indeed commenced that process, and it's proving quite successful.
I thought one of the executive orders was to basically invite the MPP applicants into the country.
Congressman, as I've indicated, what we have done is we have developed a safe, orderly, and humane way for individuals with active cases in the MPP program.
How many are we talking about?
Yes, Congressman.
How many?
To be processed through the ports of entry so that they can pursue their claims under the law in the United States.
So I assume the answer is yes, you are bringing them in. How many?
I will get for you the numbers that we have admitted who have claims for relief under the law in the United States already made.
All right. Do you agree with the Trump regulation prohibiting aliens with DUI convictions, which the DUI resulted in serious bodily injury or death of another person, making them ineligible for asylum?
I'm not familiar. Is there a regulation on point, Congressman, to address that?
Specifically discussing who's eligible for asylum. The Trump administration promulgated a regulation saying you've got a DUI conviction, for example, that resulted in serious bodily injury or death of another person, you're not eligible for asylum here. Do you agree with that policy?
I'm not familiar with that regulation, but I will make this statement quite clearly. Individuals who pose a public safety threat will not remain in the United States.
Does that include DUI convictions?
It can.
Does it include child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment?
It can.
Well, I mean, yes, it can. The implication is, or it cannot.
Well, actually, Congressman, having been a prosecutor for 12 years, I will not equate a DUI, an individual who is guilty of 2 DUIs, for example, or 1 DUI in the last 12 months that resulted in the death of an individual, with an individual who has been in the country for 30 years, committed a DUI 27 years ago, has lived an upstanding life since then, has contributed to the community, and has 3 U.S. that Congress passed. We are expelling single adults.
Again, with all due respect, every interview I've seen with these individuals coming across the border say they're responding to the changed policies that the administration has announced and implemented. They hear from their friends and families that they've been successfully admitted. So the message that you are sending is pretty loud and clear to the enormous number of people now heading north to the border. I just wonder how
gentleman's time has expired.
I must
recognize the young lady from Texas.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I respectfully and strongly disagree.
Chair recognizes the young lady from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. My community has been mentioned a number of times during this hearing, and minority members of this committee flew to my community on Monday, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity you've given me to participate. Secretary Mayorkas, it's great to see you. Thank you for your testimony today and for the competent leadership you are finally providing the Department of Homeland Security. I represent El Paso, Texas, a community that is deeply impacted by the Department of Homeland Security, by its successes or its failures. And I just want a word to all of my colleagues who are eager to come to El Paso. Please check in with me. I would love to connect you. You know, it's easy to connect with law enforcement. Would love to connect you with the advocates and attorneys and all the folks working on the humanitarian end of this multifaceted challenge that we have on the border. Only by understanding all these facets can we bring forward legitimate, credible solutions. El Paso is on the front lines. It has been. We were the site of the test to separate families, children from their families, and many other policies. And I think all of us, especially El Pasoans, can agree that this is unsustainable for everyone involved, for the migrants, for the agents, the nonprofits, and the volunteers. And so I want to focus on solutions. My Republican colleagues, especially on this committee, are focusing on trying to return to the Trump era status quo. So, Mr. Secretary, I want to take those recommendations that they have to their logical conclusion. And I'm going to ask that you be as succinct as possible because I've got a lot to try to get through in my 3.5 minutes left. Mr. Secretary, did migrants stop their journey northward while Donald Trump was president?
No, Congresswoman, they did not.
They also say that you should continue spending billions of dollars that have been taken from our military on building and maintaining a wall. Mr. Secretary, on Sunday, I met an MSNBC reporter at the wall in El Paso. Just before I arrived, the MSNBC film crew filmed adult men climbing over the wall with a makeshift ladder. They were later apprehended by Border Patrol. But Mr. Secretary, do walls stop people from coming to the United States?
They do not, Congresswoman. The security of the border requires a multifaceted approach. Physical barriers, individual personnel, and technology. And the use of technology should be exploited in the best sense of that term. Its capacity is enormous.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues alike, we all feel immense concern about vulnerable souls and their journey northward being targeted and victimized by cartels. But at the same time, my Republican colleagues are asking that you reinstate MPP. Are you aware, sir, that the families, the women, children, vulnerable populations who have been subjected to MPP were targets of and victims of crime from those cartels and criminal organizations while they waited for their asylum hearings in a land that was not their own?
I'm very familiar with that, Congresswoman. Quite frankly, I'm very familiar with what happened to very young children, many under the age of 10, 12, who were expelled by the prior administration, and what happened to them in the hands of traffickers or otherwise dropped off in a country with which they were unfamiliar.
Thank you, sir. I have 1 minute left, and I'm going to try to get through as much as possible. My Republican colleagues would like to see the continuation of Title 42 expulsions. I'm not a fan. But is Mexico going to accept folks that America is expelling into their country indefinitely? I mean, can we expect Mexico to forever just take everyone, continue to accept everyone that we expel? Or might they at some point tell us no?
Congresswoman, the expulsion authority is not an immigration authority. I just want to be clear, it is a public health authority of the CDC. And we work very closely with Mexico in addressing the public health imperative.
Mr. Secretary, just two last statements that I'd like for you to follow up with me in my office about. The first, we've gotten reports of families who were expelled under Title 42 in the Rio Grande Valley, flown to El Paso, and then expelled from El Paso into Ciudad Juarez. I want to know why that's happening, how many families that's happened to, what the plan is. And so I'd like an explanation, please, on that front. Secondly, I would like your commitment to working with me on a binational COVID plan for border communities like mine so that we can again reopen our ports of entry and get the flow going back and forth in a safe way that maintains our significance and importance to the American economy. Do I have your commitment to working with me on that and getting me that information, sir?
I most certainly, you most certainly do, Congresswoman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Young lady from Texas yields back. Mr. Secretary, let me thank you for what's been a 4-hour and 2-minute introductory session for you to the Homeland Security Committee. Let me thank you for your testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witness, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing as you've already committed to those questions. Without objection, the committee's records shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.